Chapter 553. When Jean Wan appeared in the banquet hall of Jing City that night, she caused quite a stir and astonishment. Of course, she didn't cause a stir, but she was astonished. After all, she had appeared with Mo Jingshan and was even his female companion. Jing City was the so-called Jing Circle in China. Every circle was different, and many people were unfamiliar to them. However, Mo Jingshan's influence in the business world at home and abroad was enough to make any circle want to rope him in, and there were many people who wanted to curry favor with him. After all, people in the Jing circle were arrogant. Even if they wanted to curry favor with Mo Jingshan or flatter him, they would put on a polite expression and didn't express their emotions so obviously. However, in this environment where everyone was arrogant, those people couldn't help but come over to toast Mo Jingshan as soon as they saw him, and they couldn't hide their selfishness. They didn't know whether Mo Jingshan was married or not, but they all knew that Mo Jingshan never brought any female companion with him when he went out to socialize. They didn't expect that today. Not only did CEO Mo bring a female companion, but they also looked like a good match. After all, there were a lot of young ladies who had been eyeing Mo Jingshan for a long time. It was said that several young ladies in Jing City had chased him all the way to High City but came back in disgrace before they could even see him. No one could imagine what kind of woman Mo Jingshan would like, let alone that there was such a woman standing by Mo Jingshan's side who looked so compatible with him. Whether in temperament, appearance, or other aspects that people couldn't tell, as soon as the two of them appeared, they stunned and caused a stir. Some people curiously came to inquire about Jean Wan's identity, wondering which family's lucky young lady or a beauty sent to Mo Jingshan by a master. How could she be brought out by CEO Mo? However, Jean Wan took the goblet handed over by the other party and replied with a frank and dignified smile in her eyes, "My surname is Ji, and I'm the head of MN Group. Nice to meet you." The people who came over to ask about her identity were all surprised when they heard the answer. When they remembered this MN Group, which rose in London 3 years ago, and Jean Wan, the famous female entrepreneur on this year's Forbes list, the beauty in front of them and the tall man beside her had gone far away. No wonder she could stand shoulder to shoulder with Mo Jingshan. It turned out that she was not a young lady but CEO G of MN Group who had a foothold in the business world and had become famous in recent years. Jean Wan never cared much about other people's gazes, not to mention these people were strangers she had just met today. As she walked, she took the glasses that were handed to her, maintaining a calm and generous attitude. There was not much champagne in these glasses, and each glass only had 1 or 2 mouthfuls of wine at most. She casually drank a few glasses and followed Mo Jingshan into the restaurant. The reason why she was so cooperative was that, on the one hand, she was the brand of the MN Group. She couldn't be too arrogant, but she also couldn't be looked down upon by these arrogant people in the capital circle. After all, such a banquet gathered the CEOs of many well-known domestic companies, and they could become partners of the MN Group at any time in the future. On the other hand, before arriving at the banquet, Mo Jingshan had reminded her that the circle in Beijing was much more complicated than that in High City. Therefore, it was safest to stay with Mo Jingshan. Although she had been too self-indulgent in front of Mo Jingshan recently, she had to consider the situation. A wise man submits to circumstances. Mo Jingshan was the thickest thigh in the domestic business circle. None of the thighs in the capital circle could compare to him. With such a backer, she had to obediently rely on him when she could. After entering, Mo Jingshan took a look at Jean Wan beside him, only to see that she had been holding his arm obediently and had not let go of him all the way in. He took a piece of cake from a passing waiter's plate. "Why are you so obedient now? This is a banquet in the capital city. The atmosphere is different, and the circle is different. Everyone is a stranger. You're the only one I know. If I had a second choice, would never follow you." Jean Wan answered honestly with a fake smile on her face. The man was not hurt by her words. He just smiled and handed the cake to her. "Jean Wan. It's not good for you to ask me to eat on such an occasion, is it?" He glanced down at her. Even the most famous lady in High City doesn't dare to eat at a banquet? Jean Wan, she had attended many banquets since she was a child. She had long been used to taking all kinds of delicious food from the banquet to a secluded place to taste this and that after going through the motions beautifully in the banquet hall. It was not the first or second time that she got drunk in a corner and was carried home by someone. Jean Wan was not a greedy person, but she had attended these banquets with Ji Hongwen since she was a child. She had long been used to it. Others were busy showing off at the banquet, but she just wanted to find something to eat to kill time. Otherwise, looking at those hypocritical faces would only make her tired and bored. Jean Wan pursed her lips and didn't speak. Before coming to the banquet, Mo Jingshan knew she would be hungry at night, so he asked Xiao Hu to get out of the car to buy some food for her, but Jean Wan had been sitting in the car without eating, so the dessert was left in the car. She didn't want the car to be filled with the smell of dessert, so she didn't eat it. But now she was really hungry, especially when she was on her period. She felt that she had become a lot more sensitive. She felt cold, tired, or hungry, and she felt weak. She took the cake, found a place to rest in the sofa in the corner, and sat down to eat. The people around them also sat down, but most of them were chatting about work cooperation while drinking casually. After all, Jean Wan was brought here by Mo Jingshan. Even though she was stunningly beautiful, even though she was the head of MN Group, she sat there eating. Although she was not as indifferent as Mo Jingshan, she basically didn't look at those men with big bellies who came near, and these men didn't dare to talk to her because Mo Jingshan was standing nearby. Chapter 554. When Mo Jingshan saw that the cake in Jean Wan's hand had been eaten up, he handed her a plate. Jean Wan took it, took a bite of the cake, chewed it slowly, and said vaguely, "CEO Mo, haven't you noticed that since you walked into the banquet hall, someone's eyes have been glued to you, and he hasn't left you at all?" Mo Jingshan took the goblet handed over by the waiter next to him and didn't look in any other direction. He just stood between the single sofa and didn't move more than 3 meters away from her, no matter when someone came to talk to him or now. "Really? Are you talking about yourself?" The man's indifferent voice sounded indifferent and he glanced at her again. Jean Wan resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Don't you know whether I was busy eating cake or looking at you just now?" The man smiled. "Do you dare say you didn't look at me?" Jean Wan, she did look at him twice. She looked at the crowd again and found that the person who had been looking at Mo Jingshan had disappeared. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and look at Mo Jingshan again. Seeing that the man's eyes were indifferent, it was clear that he knew who she was talking about, but he didn't intend to pay attention to her. Oh, what a pity. It seemed that another girl had a one-sided love for him. But Jean Wan didn't know much about Mo Jingshan in the past 3 years, and she didn't know whether he was familiar with the people in Beijing, but from the attitude of these people toward Mo Jingshan, he should be very familiar with him. Therefore, in this so-called Beijing circle that she didn't know very well, there should be other aspects that she didn't know very well. As she thought about it, she took another bite of the cake and picked up a glass of champagne handed over by the waiter to drink. As soon as she brought the champagne to her lips, a young man suddenly came over and said something to Mo Jingshan. Then Jean Wan vaguely heard that he seemed to say, "CEO Mo, can I have a word with you?" Jean Wan couldn't help raising her head to look at the man, only to find that he seemed to be standing with the beauty who had been looking at Mo Jingshan just now. Mo Jingshan glanced at the man indifferently. "What's the matter? Just stand here and say it." The man's face darkened, and then he said with a faint smile, "CEO Mo, our Rome Corporation and Shine Group have been old friends for years. 2 years ago, my sister graduated and went to work in High City and stayed in Shine for a long time. CEO Mo, you've been taking good care of her. It's rare that we meet again. Even if you don't give me, your business partner, face my sister." Mo Jingshan did not have the slightest intention of moving. His tone was mild and unperturbed. When Miss Rome worked at Shine in High City, she only managed to get an internship in the company because of her high education and personal ability. When she worked there for a year, I was in America and only returned to China 3 times a year. How could I possibly take care of her? The so-called Miss Rome's brother smiled and said, "Speaking of which, it's all thanks to my sister that our Rome Corporation has the opportunity to cooperate with Shine. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't want to work in Beijing after graduation and ran away from home to High City, pretending to have no background and only relying on her own resume to work at Shine Group, we wouldn't have gotten involved in so many things." Mo Jingshan put the goblet in his hand on the waiter's tray with his well-defined fingers and glanced at Jean Wan, who was sitting there as if watching a show. He glanced at the goblet in her hand, but when he didn't see her, she picked up the goblet again. Was she going to drink champagne until she was drunk? However, when the man's cold eyes fell on Jean Wan's face, his eyes became gentle and indifferent, but he said indifferently to the people around him, "It's just a business relationship between the two sides. It has nothing to do with anyone. CEO Rome, don't think too much." Just then, a woman in a white evening dress suddenly came out of the crowd. She looked about 23 or 24 years old, about the same age as Jean Wan. She seemed to have waited for a long time, but Mo Jingshan didn't come over, so she plucked up the courage to come over. Her eyes were glued to him, and her eyes were full of surprise and unconcealable love for seeing him again. The people in the banquet hall began to whisper. Most of them lived in Beijing, and the story of Rong Yan, the second daughter of the famous Rong family in Beijing, had almost spread in the circle. It was said that the second daughter of the Rong family returned to China after graduating from Boston. She had been a good girl in the Rong family since she was a child, but after graduation, she went to Los Angeles for an internship for several months. After returning home, she refused to stay in Beijing as if possessed and insisted on going back to the United States to work, but the Rong family didn't agree, took away her passport, and clearly told her not to go abroad again. The second daughter of the Rong family had always been good-tempered, but this time, she ran away from home in a fit of anger and went straight to High City. She hid her noble identity as the second daughter of the Rong family in Beijing and went to work in Shine Group in High City as a student who had just graduated from abroad. Because she had the qualifications of an internship in Shine Group in the United States for several months, she applied very smoothly and went straight to work. It was said that she was only an intern at first, but she worked hard in High City and refused to go back to Beijing no matter what. No one knew what she was waiting for, but it was said that when Mo Jingshan returned to High City from the United States several times during that year, Miss Rong followed him closely as an intern assistant. She did all kinds of things very well, serving tea and pouring water. She worked very hard, so she worked at Shine Group in High City for more than a year. It wasn't difficult to guess that the second daughter of the Rong family stayed in High City and preferred to hide her identity as an intern employee because of Mo Jingshan. Later, Rong Yan's brother, Rong Cheng, the current general manager of the Rong Corporation, went to High City to discuss a cooperation project and found that she was working there. When Rong Cheng went there, it happened to be the time when Mo Jingshan returned to China, and they forcibly took Rong Yan back to Beijing in front of Mo Jingshan. After Rong Yan was taken back to Beijing, she made a scene for a long time. It was said that she went on a hunger strike and cried, trying to go to Los Angeles or High City, but the Rong family wouldn't allow her, a young lady in the social circle of Beijing, to indulge herself in pursuing a man. Even if the man she pursued was Mo Jingshan, they wouldn't allow her to wait for a man in such a humble way. Just like that, more than a year passed. Mo Jingshan finally returned to the country. Mo Jingshan finally came to Jing City. Chapter 555. Seeing that Rong Yan had come over, Rong Cheng looked at Mo Jingshan again. CEO Mo, we've known each other for a long time. I don't think it's appropriate for us to discuss some things here. Why don't we sit down somewhere else and talk? After all, Rong Cheng was the general manager of the Rong Corporation. He was about the same age as Mo Jingshan. He smiled carelessly, but it was not hard to see that he was also a man of means. At least on the surface, he appeared to be very kind, but in his bones, he was obviously arrogant as a member of the Rong family. It seemed that the Rong family had been so humble, but Mo Jingshan didn't even intend to give them face, which made him very unhappy. Rong Yan stood there, looking in Mo Jingshan's direction. She wanted to approach him but seemed a little uneasy, but it was clear that she only had eyes for him. As long as Mo Jingshan could give her a little smile or response, she would be more duty-bound. Noticing that Rong Yan's eyes were glued to him, Mo Jingshan glanced at her. As soon as she met his eyes, the smile on Rong Yan's face became wider, and her eyes were full of admiration, affection, love, and excitement. Seeing that his good-tempered sister seemed to be possessed by Mo Jingshan, Rong Qing felt a headache coming on, and his tone became much stiffer. CEO Mo, it was just two simple words, but they were full of the attitude of a superior in the capital circle, but they clearly contained a hint of compromise. He hoped that Mo Jingshan would take the initiative to give him face, so that they wouldn't be embarrassed later. After all, his sister was watching, and he couldn't just leave her hanging like this. Mo Jingshan's indifferent eyes swept over Rong Yan. His eyes were clear, and his voice was cold. CEO Rong, if you want to talk about the cooperation between our two companies, you can do it here. But if you want to talk about other irrelevant things, forgive me for not being able to accompany you. My female companion is still here. How can I leave her behind? Mo Jingshan's voice was neither soft nor indifferent, but it successfully reminded everyone in the banquet hall of who had just appeared here with Mo Jingshan. CEO Mo had never seen any woman by his side, but today, he appeared with MN Group's CEO G. Furthermore, the two of them looked so compatible. On the other hand, although Rong Yan was from a prominent family, she looked like a flower in a greenhouse, unable to withstand the wind and rain, and naively willing to marry him just because of her love for him. Besides, she had pursued Mo Jingshan for so long without any response. The meaning of CEO Mo's words was very clear. Rong Yan looked at Jin Wan and Jin Wan with a smile. Jin Wan, who was suddenly stared at by many people, still sat calmly and quietly on the single sofa. She gave a faint smile. No one knew whether she was smiling or not, but obviously, the advantage of the Rong family's second daughter's family background was useless in front of Jin Wan. The princess of the capital circle might not be comparable to Jin Wan, a woman who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Mo Jingshan. Since Mo Jingshan walked into the banquet hall today, Rong Yan's eyes had never left him, so she had naturally seen the woman who came in with him. When she saw that he had a female companion, Rong Yan was stunned. She had been longing for Mo Jingshan for so long, but although she hadn't received any response, she had never seen another woman by his side. Unexpectedly, on this long-awaited reunion, she saw. Mo Jingshan walked all the way into the banquet hall with that woman and saw the two of them whispering from time to time. There was no sense of superiority or flattery on the woman's face and even a little arrogant. However, Mo Jingshan, who had always been cold, seemed to indulge her very much. He even brought her a cake in public and waited for her to eat it as if spoiling a child. Now that she heard Mo Jingshan's words, although not exactly a slap to her face, were very direct, her mind instantly went blank and was in a mess. She suddenly remembered the time when she was still working at Shine Group. That time when he returned to China, she worked by his side cautiously. Later, when she was praised by him for her meticulous and outstanding performance, she blushed in front of him, but he did not look at her and directly walked past her. That indescribable aura made her heart beat wildly. Once, Mo Jingshan had a dinner party in China. As an intern assistant, she had planned to go with him, but Shenmu stopped her. Shenmu said that CEO Mo never had a woman by his side, nor did he need any female staff to accompany him. He also asked her if she didn't notice that CEO Mo didn't even have a female secretary by his side. At that time, Rong Yan felt that Mo Jingshan's purity made her heart tremble. She thought that he was a good man and couldn't control her heart, so she wanted to follow him. Even if he was not interested in her, she believed that as long as they got familiar with each other, as time went by, as long as he knew that she was the second daughter of the Rong family, there would be sparks between them. After all, their families were well matched. But to her surprise, after Mo Jingshan learned her identity, he was not surprised at all. He just coldly asked her to hand over her work to someone else and then let her go back to Beijing with her brother. Before Rong Yan was forcibly taken back to Beijing, she waited outside Mo Jingshan's office door for half the night, just wanting to talk to him. At that time, she probably wanted to confess her love to him as the second daughter of the Rong family. But that night, Mo Jingshan didn't come out of the office break room and didn't even look at her. Later, she got Mo Jingshan's number from her brother. When she called him, he didn't answer. When she texted him, he didn't reply. But Rong Yan firmly believed that Mo Jingshan must have special feelings for her. She also believed that she was worthy of him and that sooner or later, he would seriously see her heart. But today, the rule that he never took a female companion with him seemed to be broken. The woman named Jin Wan seemed to be a very special existence, so special that Rong Yan felt very uncomfortable. Chapter 556. Hearing her voice, the man looked at her. His eyes were calm and unchanged. Rong Yan looked at him with a very stubborn expression. I wanted to invite Mr. Mo to the Rong family after the banquet. After all, in addition to my brother's warm invitation, my parents also want to meet you. But I didn't expect that Mr. Mo would bring a female companion today. I didn't think it through. Please forgive me, Miss Ji. As she said this, Rong Yan looked directly at Jin Wan and smiled at her, behaving like a lady from a wealthy family. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and said flatly, you don't have to apologize to her. Even if I don't have a female companion tonight, I have no reason to go to the Rong family. The relationship between our companies can't be so deep. I'll do what I should do, but Miss Rong, you'd better restrain yourself as soon as possible, lest I hurt your self-esteem by being too straightforward and direct. Rong Yan widened her eyes. It seemed that she had always known that Mo Jingshan was a cold and unreasonable person, but this man had always been cold and seductive, making people want to get close to him. She had long been accustomed to and accepted his indifference, but she didn't expect to see his colder side. Her eyes turned red and she said, it's just a dinner. Besides, the Rong Corporation has been cooperating with the Shine Group for more than a year. Do you think it's so unnecessary for us to have a private relationship? Mo Jingshan said, yes, it's unnecessary. It was only a short 6 words, but he said it casually, but it was a matter of course. The expression on Rong Yan's face was almost frozen. Jin Wan was also stunned. She had heard that there were countless women who wanted to climb into Mo Jingshan's bed, but it was the first time that she had seen Mo Jingshan directly and straightforwardly refuse a woman's love on such an occasion. Mo Jingshan's refusal was straightforward, with a unique coldness that belonged to Mo Jingshan, as if he was such a person in front of others. No one's emotions and feelings could move him, and no one could easily break into his world. She was the only one left. When Jin Wan picked up another glass of champagne, her fingers unconsciously clenched the glass, but her eyes remained unchanged, as if everything in front of her had nothing to do with her, whether it was the eyes and whispers of the people in the banquet hall, or the narrowed eyes of Rong Yan's brother. Rong Yan clenched the hem of her dress tighter, and her eyes became redder. She didn't expect that after waiting for more than a year and finally being able to approach Mo Jingshan when he came to Beijing, she would get such a cruel rejection. He didn't even treat her differently because she was the second daughter of the Rong family. What was more, when she was still an employee of Shine Group, he praised her work efficiency generously, but after learning her identity and seeing through her purpose, he became as cold as the thin snow on the top of a mountain, and she couldn't even reach his edge. How could there be such a good man in this world? How could there be such an indifferent man? How could she be so infatuated with him? At this time, a boss in the capital circle came to talk to Mo Jingshan, and for a moment, the Rong siblings were almost ignored. Rong Cheng was obviously in a bad mood, but he couldn't lose his temper on such an occasion. He turned to look at Rong Yan, only to see that Rong Yan pursed her lips and said nothing with red eyes, so he angrily turned to take her hand. Let's go. Rong Yan still stood where she was, looking in Mo Jingshan's direction, full of unwillingness and uncertainty. She couldn't believe that the man she had been in love with for so long could be so indifferent to her. Rong Cheng said with an ugly face, don't you see that she doesn't even care about you? Why are you still standing here and looking at her? At this time, Rong Yan suddenly turned to look at Jin Wan, who had been sitting on the sofa from beginning to end, drinking champagne or eating desserts, as if she had never been involved with Mo Jingshan, but it was clear that she was the biggest obstacle between her and Mo Jingshan. If you really want to find a chance to talk to Mo Jingshan, he will stay in Jing City for a long time. It's not impossible to wait for a while. If you continue to stare at him like this, you'll bring shame to the Rong family. If this matter is spread to the family, I'm afraid that even I won't be able to bring you out, Rong Cheng warned her in a low voice. Hearing this, Rong Yan, who had been standing there stiffly, moved aside slightly. Then she was held by Rong Cheng's hand and staggered out of the crowd. Jin Wan seemed to have been watching all this coldly, but even if Mo Jingshan's eyes did not fall on her, he noticed that in this short period of time, Jin Wan had drunk the 4th glass of champagne. Now in front of him, she really dared to drink it. While Mo Jingshan was talking with others, Jin Wan got up and went to the bathroom. This dinner party was held in a high-end hotel in Beijing. It seemed that all the floors had been booked by the organizer. When Jin Wan entered the bathroom, she didn't notice that there was someone in it. Later, when she heard the sound next door, she didn't take it seriously and pushed the door open to go to the bathroom. Just now, she had been sitting, so her stomach didn't hurt so much, but now that she stood up and walked a few steps, she felt the pain in her lower abdomen began again. She decided to stay in the bathroom for a while, waiting for the pain to subside before going out. Suddenly, she heard someone coming out from next door, followed by the sound of high heels and the sound of Rong Yan talking to someone on the phone. I didn't sneak out. My brother has a dinner party to attend today and said he would take me out to relax. Dad, I know. I know the reputation of the Rong family is more important than anything else, but I really like him. Even if I can't go to the United States or Haiqing again, at least let me see him when he comes to Beijing. I've always listened to my family since I was a child, but when it comes to love, if I hadn't met him, I might have listened to my family's arrangements, but now that I've met him, I'll never meet a man who can move my heart more than him in my life. In fact, you also admire Mo Jingshan, don't you? It's just because I'm the one who takes the initiative that you don't agree, but I just don't want to let go. Even if, maybe there is a white moon in his heart, it should be a long time ago. He hasn't had a woman by his side in the past few years. I believe that sincerity can move mountains. One day, I will definitely be able to move him. Jin Wan, who was sitting on the toilet in the bathroom, the white moon in Rong Yan's words, rubbed her belly speechlessly. Chapter 557. This Miss Rong must have watched too many novels and TV shows and completely regarded herself as the heroine of a certain princess drama, while others were the moonlight or NPCs who were bound to be defeated by her in the end. Even the arrogant ways of the princesses of the Beijing circle were so refreshing. It was quiet outside. Perhaps Miss Rong had finished her phone call. Jin Wan waited for a while and heard no sound, so she came out. She didn't expect that she hadn't left. Why was she standing here so quietly like a ghost? Anyway, she had come out and seen everything. Jin Wan just glanced at her, walked over, put down her bag, washed her hands, and dried them with hot air. Then she took out lipstick from her bag and touched up her makeup in front of the mirror. After all, the dress she wore today was very simple and elegant, and she only wore light makeup. If she didn't touch up her makeup, she would look too perfunctory for this party. She had just applied a few times when Rong Yan's eyes looked directly at her through the mirror in front of her. Jin Wan had never paid attention to others, but she still paused because of Rong Yan's gaze. The two of them looked at each other through the mirror. One was carefully looking and observing her, while the other was calmly and indifferently applying lipstick on her lips. Jin Wan knew very well that Rong Yan was looking at her inquisitively. She wasn't sure who she was, and she wasn't sure if she should ask Jin Wan anything, so she just looked at her with a complicated expression. There was a sneer in Jin Wan's calm eyes. She was used to all kinds of spoiled young ladies from rich families who were arrogant and provocative, but when it came to Rong Yan, a so-called princess of the Beijing circle, she was like a rival in love, who had been well protected by her family since she was a child. She only felt disgusted. She liked a man, but she was so careful to do so many things. First, she hid her identity and went to work in his company. Then, she followed him and poured him tea. Finally, she suddenly found out that this little intern was actually the second daughter of the Rong family. She made it seem like she was acting in a movie. Who was it for? Did she think Mo Jingshan was a teenage boy who had his first awakening of love and would be moved by her unhesitatingly romantic way of courting him? In Jin Wan's eyes, what Rong Yen did was child's play. In Mo Jingshan's eyes, she was probably a psycho. This kind of little rabbit might not even be called a little rabbit. After all, when a rabbit was anxious, it would still hurt when it bit. Seeing the coldness in Jin Wan's eyes, Jin Wan walked over and stood by her side, asking, "Miss Ji, what is your relationship with Mo Jingshan?" Jin Wan raised her eyebrows in the mirror and chuckled because she was too straightforward. She answered indifferently, "Miss Rong, what do you think? What do you think our relationship should be?" After saying that, he retracted his gaze and continued to touch up his makeup. He did not intend to be entangled with her for too long. Rong Yen didn't want to hide such a big knot in her heart, so she simply walked up to Jin Wan and blocked her view while she was touching up her makeup, but when she saw Jin Wan's face at such a close distance, her heart still twitched slightly. Earlier, Jin Wan was sitting on the sofa in the corner of the banquet hall. There was not enough light to see her clearly, but he could tell that she was a very beautiful woman. Looking at her now, she was more than beautiful. Rong Yen had seen all kinds of beautiful women in this circle since she was a child. She had seen many beautiful women, but there were only a few who could be called beautiful. Unfortunately, this Jin Wan was one of the most beautiful people. The woman in front of him was beautiful, but there was only a slight sneer in her eyes. Even though her sight was blocked, she still calmly touched up her makeup, and then put her things back into her bag, as if there was only an obstacle in front of her that she could not move away. She did not intend to avoid it, nor did she intend to push it away. She just completely ignored it. Seeing that Jin Wan was going to ignore her and was about to walk away, Rong Yen asked again, "How far have you and Jingshan developed? Between you and him?" "Jingshan? Why are you calling me so intimately?" Jin Wan expressionlessly took the bag into her hands, tilting her head to look at her. "Are you close to him? No matter how far we have developed, it doesn't seem to be something you're qualified to ask, Miss Rong. In Beijing, even if the Rong family can do whatever they want, it doesn't seem to be easy to interfere with other people's feelings. Miss Rong, do you think you're so naive? Do you think I'll patiently tell you our story just because you insist on asking me a few questions?" Rong Yen didn't expect that Jin Wan would either ignore her or be so unkind as soon as she opened her mouth. It seemed that there really was a story between her and Mo Jingshan. She had been protected by the Rong family since she was a child. It was no exaggeration to say that she was the apple of the Rong family's eye, but she didn't have the bad habits of being arrogant or spoiled. Although she was not really naive, her way of thinking was relatively simple. However, Jin Wan's words still poked her heart, and Rong Yan's face darkened. Rong Yan bit her lip and said again, "When I was working in High City, I heard people mention something like Miss Ji, but only occasionally. At that time, those people cautiously winked at each other as if mentioning this name in the company was taboo. So this so-called Miss Ji is you?" "Yes, so what?" Jin Wan asked. "You and Mo Jingshan were together, weren't you? But then you broke up, right? So they didn't dare to mention your name in the company, so did you hurt him? Then how dare you come back to stand by his side? He deserves better, and you don't deserve it." Rong Yen stared at her. Jin Wan looked at her with wide eyes, like a princess who had turned into a fighter to protect the love she believed in. In fact, Jin Wan envied her more or less. At least she had been carefree since she was a child, and at least all her purposes were pure. When Jin Wan spoke just now, she just wanted to shatter the unrealistic fantasies of Miss Rong, a pure little girl, about the man she liked, but she didn't expect that Miss Rong was so simple and stubborn. No wonder she became the white moonlight in her eyes. Perhaps Rong Yen thought she was the kind of woman who had been with Mo Jingshan and then left him because of some interests or some misunderstanding. She must have labeled her as the white moonlight in her heart. Seeing that Jin Wan just looked at her coldly and didn't speak after hearing her words about whether he deserved her or not, Rong Yen instinctively felt that she must have touched Jin Wan's sore spot. Although Jin Wan was beautiful, she believed that Mo Jingshan was just obsessed with her. She must have seen that Mo Jingshan's position in the domestic and foreign business world was becoming more and more stable, so she wanted to cling to his thigh for her own interests. She was definitely a scheming woman. Chapter 558. Of course, Jin Wan didn't know that Rong Yen was imagining a Mary Sue drama, and she was the villain, a coquettish bitch. But Jin Wan could see some emotions in her eyes. Jin Wan raised her red lips and smiled lazily. "Miss Rong, you're probably a flower in a greenhouse. It's fine if you think things are simple, but it's wrong of you to blame me with your stupid idea. You forced yourself to put the plot you've made up on me. I haven't said anything yet, but you're the one who's excited. How should I describe your expression now?" Rong Yen blushed at her words. If you hadn't separated from Jingshan for some reason, how could he have let the woman he liked leave him? Since you've separated, it proves that his feelings for you are just that. If he really likes you, why haven't you appeared by his side in the past few years? Why hasn't he mentioned your name? In the past 3 years. All of this. No matter how she quarreled or entangled with him, it didn't seem to make sense to tell an outsider. Besides, in the past 3 years, she really hadn't been by Mo Jingshan's side. On the contrary, in order to wait for him, Miss Rong returned to High City from Los Angeles. She would rather see him only a few times a year and still firmly waited for him in the company in High City. She stood by his side, appeared behind him, and even received praise or a smile from him because of her excellent performance at work. For a few seconds, Jin Wan's heart was filled with mixed emotions. Earlier, when she was outside listening to the people whispering about Miss Rong, she did not have any other thoughts. However, right now, her heart was filled with displeasure. But the smile on her face didn't fade, and the curve of her red lips deepened. She said lightly, "It doesn't matter whether he mentioned my name or not. What matters is that Miss Rong, you chased him from Los Angeles to High City, hid your identity, and followed him intimately, but in the end, you were still rejected. You don't even know the slightest bit about the situation between him and me, yet you dare to make an evaluation. I also admire your courage. He asked your brother to directly bring you back to Jing City. Can't you see that he's obviously keeping a distance? Do you want him to reject you a few more times, or not give you any face in public like he did just now? When you get tired of hanging around in front of him, maybe you will know how hurtful he can be when he hates someone. At that time, I'm afraid you won't even be able to find your voice when you cry." In fact, Jin Wan felt a little upset when she said this, although she didn't want to admit it. Mo Jingshan didn't hate Rong Yen. Even though he didn't respond to her at all and didn't intend to give face to the Rong family, he didn't know what Rong Yen was like when she was with him, but it was clear that he was very polite to her. The more Rong Yen listened, the angrier she became. "I'm just chasing him. No matter what your relationship is, he is not married, and you haven't been by his side these years. It's not wrong for me to chase him. If you don't want other women to be by his side, then don't leave. Why did you come back after leaving for so long? I didn't interfere in anyone's relationship. I like him, and I like him openly." Hearing this, Jin Wan suddenly sneered. She didn't explain and didn't want to talk to her anymore, so she turned and walked out. Rong Yen thought that Jin Wan couldn't argue with her and thought that Jin Wan must be in the wrong. When she thought that Jin Wan would go to Mo Jingshan after leaving, she hurriedly walked over and reached out to grab Jin Wan's hand. "Miss Ji, wait a minute. Don't go. Let's make it clear. I don't care what kind of relationship you have with Jingshan, but I'm certainly not a mistress who interferes in someone else's relationship. When I was chasing him, he never had another woman by his side, nor was he a lover or married. Even if you want to take him back, we should compete fairly. She wanted to continue, but Jin Wan impatiently shook her hand off, but Rong Yen refused to let go. Jin Wan turned back to her and said coldly, "Let go." Rong Yen stared at her. "Then tell me, what kind of relationship do you have with him? What kind of past do you have? Girlfriend or first love? Or bed partner?" Jin Wan couldn't hold back the sneer on her face. She mercilessly shook her off, but Rong Yan's hand held her tightly. The two of them were entangled in front of the bathroom door. There were water stains and cleaning fluid left by the cleaning staff here. Although it was okay to walk normally, both women were wearing dresses and high heels. After a tug and pull, Rong Yen was suddenly thrown back by Jin Wan and fell to the ground. At the same time, Rong Yen was still holding Jin Wan hard at the moment of falling. She couldn't hold her hand, so she grabbed her skirt. Jin Wan's skirt was torn by her and she stumbled down, and the two of them fell to the ground almost at the same time. However, Rong Yen fell to the ground, but Jin Wan was dragged to the corner of the bathroom door, and there was a sharp pain on her back. She stood up, rubbed her waist with one hand, and picked up her bag with the other. She was about to leave, but Rong Yen stubbornly grabbed her skirt again. Jin Wan was annoyed by this pestering Beijing circle princess and completely lost her patience. She shouted at her, "Are you done?" With that, she reached out to push Rong Yen away from her skirt. Rong Yen suddenly grabbed her hand again, and her eyes were a little red. She felt uncomfortable when she thought of the scene when Mo Jingshan and Jin Wan appeared at the banquet together. When she thought of Mo Jingshan's indulgent and gentle gaze toward Jin Wan that no one had ever enjoyed, she felt as if countless bottles of various flavors had been knocked over in her heart, and finally, all of them condensed into jealousy. The first woman in the world to make Rong Yen jealous was probably Jin Wan. "Are you crazy?" Jin Wan was about to continue with her actions with an ugly face, but before her hand fell on Rong Yan's arm, a cold, low voice suddenly rang from the side. "What are you doing?" When Jin Wan heard this cold shout, she subconsciously turned around and abruptly saw Rong Yan's brother, Rong Cheng, quickly approaching from the opposite aisle. As the general manager of the Rong Corporation, he naturally carried an aloof and unapproachable aura. His gaze was clearly hostile toward Jin Wan. Rong Cheng walked up to them in 2 or 3 steps, pushed Jin Wan away, and put one hand around Rong Yen's shoulder, who was still sitting on the ground. "Yen, are you all right?" Chapter 559. Although Rong Yen said she was fine, the forbearance and grievance in her eyes were very obvious. Caught off guard, Jin Wan was pushed again. Thankfully, she steadied herself in advance and only took a step back to lean against the wall. She did not fall down again. She abruptly raised her eyes to look at Rong Cheng, who was about to help his sister up. "Is this all the general manager of the Rong Corporation can do? You fell together. Even if she is your sister and you are anxious to help her up, you don't have to come over and push me." Rong Cheng was still checking Rong Yan's feet, who was still sitting on the ground. Hearing Jin Wan's words, he pursed his lips into a cold line and glared at her coldly. "CEOG, my sister's leg was fractured when she fell down the stairs a few years ago. I don't expect you to consciously leave Mo Jingshan, but now you actually let her fall to the ground. Do you really think you can have a foothold in Beijing just because you have MN Group under your name? If anything happens to my sister's leg because of this fall, I'll make you and your company completely disappear from the country." The Rong family's status in Beijing was indeed not simple. They had the backing of various leaders and people in the Beijing circle. Their relationships were complicated. It was indeed very easy to bring down a group that was registered in the UK and had just moved back to China. Jin Wan steadied herself against the wall and coldly watched the affectionate pair of brother and sister. It turned out that Rong Yan's injury could be blamed on her. At the same time, meeting Rong Cheng's cold and angry gaze, Jin Wan immediately gave a faint smile. "I say, CEO Rong, did you see the whole process of me and her falling from dozens of meters away, or did you install a pinhole camera in this bathroom? Do you know how the two of us fell?" You two are indeed biological siblings. You are so arbitrary and self-centered. Everything is based on your own assumptions and guesses. Whether her leg was fractured or not has nothing to do with me. Even if she has a fracture now, it has nothing to do with me. If you can't figure out the situation, you can find the surveillance video outside the bathroom and check it. Fortunately, we fell here. If it was in a bathroom without a surveillance camera, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to explain myself even if I opened my mouth 10 times. They even made the MN group disappear without a trace. The Rong family was really arrogant. Rong Cheng's face darkened. If you didn't push her, why would she fall here? She can't have any more accidents with her legs. She knows better than anyone else. If it weren't for you, would she have fallen to the ground? Did you sprain your ankle again? Jean Wan was amused and did not bother to explain. She raised her hand to point at the camera. I won't repeat my good words. If you have anything to say, wait until we've seen the surveillance footage. Rong Cheng sneered. There's no need to take so much trouble to check the surveillance footage. Who would check the surveillance footage outside the women's bathroom for no reason? I was wondering why she didn't come out after entering the bathroom for so long. It seems that she was pestered by you. Jean Wan, damn it, he was really good at distorting right and wrong. Jean Wan was originally very calm. She was just the second daughter of the Rong family who loved Mo Jingshan deeply. She was already used to this kind of thing. If she wanted to deal with such a boring existence, she had thousands of ways, but it depended on whether she wanted to do it or not. But what was this? Deliberately framing her? Or did this pair of brother and sister want to vent their anger on her because they were ignored by Mo Jingshan just now? Damn it, Mo Jingshan was such a jinx. Jean Wan coldly looked at Rong Yan's face, who was focused on her injury because of her sprained leg and ankle. Miss Rong, are you mute? Your brother is biting people like a mad dog. Don't you know how to refute? Just now, you kept saying that you were upright. Don't tell me you want to take advantage of the situation and pour dirty water on me. If so, you will lose the right to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. Was I the one who pushed you? Miss Rong? Rong Yan's expression froze. She turned to look at Jean Wan, who was angry but still had a calm and cold smile in her eyes. She then glanced at Rong Cheng, who had an ugly expression, and said softly, Brother. Rong Cheng furrowed his brows. Yen, don't be afraid of her. Brother is here. Jean Wan, damn, how could the scene of brother-sister love be so cruel? Jean Wan suddenly thought of Xiao Lui, but when she thought of the scene where Xiao Lui locked her up in the villa halfway up the mountain, she immediately shivered in disgust. Why was she thinking of that grandson Xiao Lui? Jean Wan sneered. The second daughter of the Rong family is afraid of me? CEO Rong, do you not understand your sister's stubborn temper, or have you been brainwashed by her obedient image since she was young? Even if I really pushed her, so what? The Rong family is rich and powerful, and my MN group has no one to rely on. Do you think I'm an ant that you can crush at any time? It's just a fall, is there a need to be so unreasonable? You haven't even broken your skin, but you're already shouting at someone else's company with great fanfare. Is this how the Rong family rises? Rong Cheng's expression was livid. At this time, several staff members of the banquet hotel and cleaning staff passed by. They did not dare to approach, but Jean Wan still heard their discussion. Aren't they the Rong family's brother and sister? What happened? Was the second daughter of the Rong family pushed by someone? Did you hear the big shots conversation in the banquet hall earlier? This second daughter of the Rong family seems to have an affair with that CEO Mo from High City. Are you serious? Are you talking about that CEO Mo? They seem to be a good match. The second daughter of the Rong family has a good reputation among all the young ladies in Jing City. She has a good personality, a high education background, and is knowledgeable. Every time she attends various banquets with the Rong family, she is always polite and courteous. When I worked in another hotel, I also hosted such banquets and met the second daughter of the Rong family. I quite like her. She doesn't have the arrogant and extravagant temperament of the eldest daughter at all. Who is the person standing there? Is this the woman who pushed the second daughter of the Rong family? What's going on? The two women are confronting each other, and CEO Rong is standing up for his sister. Aya, if you pushed someone, you should apologize. Why are you still standing there? You actually have the guts to go against the Rong family. Jean Wan's gaze slowly shifted away from the Rong family's brother and sister's faces. She turned around and coldly looked at the staff members who were discussing. The moment they met Jean Wan's gaze, they finally saw her face clearly. They did not expect that it was a beauty who was not inferior to the second daughter of the Rong family. From the way she was dressed, she did not appear to be a simple character. The staff members were frightened and hurriedly turned away, not daring to continue watching. Chapter 560. Apologize? In fact, Jean Wan's temper could be considered good now. If it were in the past, she would have raised her bag and smashed it on the head of the brother and sister. Apologize? She didn't need to apologize. However, the staff who left seemed to be biased towards Miss Rong. After they left, they informed the security guards. In less than 2 minutes, several security guards came over. When they saw Rong Cheng helping Rong Yan up, they were all from Jing City and naturally recognized Rong Cheng. They bowed to him and said, "Mr. Rong, I heard that something happened here." What happened? Rong Cheng's face darkened. Nothing. It's just that this CEO pushed my sister down inexplicably. I was going to argue with her, but she seemed to be very dissatisfied. Hearing this, the security guards subconsciously surrounded Jean Wan as if they were afraid that she would run away. Although they didn't do anything, they all stood behind her. Jean Wan was tightly surrounded by these people. Her eyes turned cold. The Rong family was really despicable. Were they going to be unreasonable just because they were in their own territory? All of a sudden, a gap appeared in the encirclement formed by the Rong siblings and the security guards, and a tall, black figure appeared. Mo Jingshan's expression was cold as he pushed them aside and walked toward her. He approached Jean Wan and saw that her complexion was not very good. Even though she had specially touched up her makeup, because he knew her too well, he could easily see a trace of exhaustion and the discomfort of her period in her cold eyes from the discomfort in her period. What's the matter? The man's voice fell on her head, but he was obviously questioning the people behind him. They didn't expect that CEO Mo would come. Even if Mo Jingshan was not from Jing City, everyone knew his name. In a place like Jing Circle, everyone wanted to flatter CEO Mo. The security guards hesitated and felt that they couldn't offend either side, so they simply didn't dare to get involved. They stepped back a little and no one dared to speak. When Rong Yan saw Mo Jingshan suddenly appear, her face also changed, but Rong Cheng coldly narrowed his eyes, obviously unhappy. Jean Wan stood by the wall and did not speak, but Mo Jingshan's hand directly held her waist. His low and deep voice was patient and gentle. "Do I have to send someone to follow you every time you go to the bathroom? I think we should transfer Feng Ling back from Nan Heng's side. I can only be at ease if she's always by your side." As he spoke, he glanced at the crease at the bottom of Jean Wan's dress. It was obvious that someone had pulled it forcefully. His gaze turned cold for a moment before he looked at the Rong siblings. Seeing Mo Jingshan holding Jean Wan's waist like this, Rong Yan suddenly felt suffocated. She stared at him with red eyes, and the uncontrollable soreness in her chest spread wantonly. "Mr. Mo," Mo Jingshan glanced at her. His gaze was cold and devoid of any warmth. Rong Cheng's eyes also flickered with obvious displeasure. He sneered. "CEO Mo, although I don't know what the relationship between you and CEO is," she pushed Rong Yan to the ground. "Now Rong Yan's ankle is sprained, and I didn't say anything. I just asked her to apologize. Is it too much?" Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes. Did you push her? It was obviously a rhetorical question. It could be heard that he didn't think she would do such an idiotic thing. Jean Wan coldly rolled her eyes. Jean Wan coldly rolled her eyes. No, she fell on her own. She grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. I was impatient and wanted to shake her off, but the two of us fell to the ground at the same time. I also sprained my ankle. I didn't say anything. It's not like I can't walk. I don't know why Miss Rong is sitting on the ground without moving. Mo Jingshan's gaze fell on Rong Cheng's face as soon as she finished speaking. He didn't look at Rong Yen again. Obviously, it was Rong Cheng who deliberately ignored the facts and provoked Jean Wan. CEO Rong, did you hear that? Rong Cheng immediately laughed in anger. CEO Mo, it seems that this CEO G really has a special relationship with you. Have you ever seen anyone who has done something bad admit it? Just now in the banquet hall, she kept looking at Rong Yen. After Rong Yen went to the bathroom, she also came to the bathroom. When I came, I saw Rong Yen sitting on the ground with red eyes, but CEO G looked cold and arrogant like a peacock. I really don't believe that she didn't push her. Mo Jingshan looked at him calmly. If she said she didn't, then she didn't. If I guessed right, she must have asked you to check the surveillance cameras here, but you refused, right? Rong Cheng narrowed his eyes quietly. He didn't expect that he knew Jean Wan so well. Seeing his expression, Mo Jingshan coldly smiled. CEO Rong, if you really want an explanation, you can ask Miss Rong what happened, or you can check the surveillance cameras. These two clear choices are placed in front of you, but you ignored them. Obviously, your purpose is not to find the truth, nor is it to seek justice. You just want to tell her that the Rong family doesn't need to reason with the people they want to target, and you don't need to show any mercy. As long as you don't like her, you can drive her into a corner at any time. Mo Jingshan's voice was indifferent and seemed to be emotionless, but it was so low and cold that it made people's hearts tremble. Rong Cheng's eyes darkened. Rong Yen looked at Mo Jingshan's arm, which had never left Jean Wan's waist, closed her eyes, raised her hand, and carefully tugged at Rong Cheng's cuff, whispering, "Brother, it wasn't Miss Ji who pushed me. I fell myself." Mo Jingshan was expressionless. Did you hear that? Before he finished speaking, he had moved his eyes away from their faces and looked at Jean Wan. Didn't you say you also sprained your ankle? Which ankle? Is it serious? Jean Wan didn't look at him and just casually adjusted the hem of her dress. It's all right. It's just a sprain. It won't affect my walking. Before she could finish her sentence, her entire body was suddenly lifted up in a horizontal hug. Jean Wan's voice was suddenly choked in her throat because of his movement. Mo Jingshan's long legs had already moved, and he didn't continue to talk nonsense with anyone here. He carried her into the elevator in the corridor ahead. This hotel had been booked by the organizer, and all the rooms upstairs could be used to rest at any time. The door of the retro luxury elevator opened and closed. Chapter 561. Jean Wan was taken into the room upstairs of the banquet hotel. She lay in the man's arms and felt that Mo Jingshan had been holding her more and more often recently. He didn't do it so often before his divorce. And he didn't do it so openly. Seeing that they had entered the room, she moved in his arms. The man glanced at her. Which leg did you sprain? With that, he was about to put her on the sofa in the room, but then he hesitated. Seeing that she didn't resist as she usually did, he paused and hesitated for a moment. He just sat on the sofa with her in his arms and let her sit on his lap. He held her waist with one hand and lifted her foot with the other. Does it still hurt? Jean Wan didn't move, just looked at the man's movements, and then looked down at her foot. It's all right. It's just a slight sprain. It's all right. It's not serious. Seeing that she didn't even want to let go of the chance to ask for comfort from him, Mo Jingshan put down the hem of her dress and held the little woman in his arms who looked distant because of the displeasure in her eyes. He chuckled and his voice became lower. Are you jealous? You don't want to be entangled with anyone. Why did you get entangled with Rong Yan in the bathroom? Jean Wan rolled her eyes at him expressionlessly. Miss Rong is stubborn and clingy. I really don't want to talk to her. The man looked at her unhappy face when she mentioned Rong Yan and smiled calmly. I thought you would ignore her to the end. From the moment Rong Yan appeared in the banquet hall to the whispers among the guests, Jean Wan had been sitting on the sofa eating and drinking quietly as if she was not affected at all. Now she finally looked displeased, although a large part of the reason was that she was framed and the other party didn't intend to ask for the truth but deliberately targeted her, which made her angry. Jean Wan glanced at the long gown that covered her feet and suppressed the emotions that flashed across her eyes. Earlier on, for a moment, I suddenly felt that it's not bad to have an older brother who will stand up for me no matter what. Mo Jingshan looked at her eyes. She couldn't see his specific expression, but there was a gentle and patient smile on his lips. Don't you have me? Jean Wan had only been thinking about her background for a moment and did not think about anything else. Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, she raised her eyes to look at him. For you, Miss Rong went to work in your company like a princess. You've seen her several times. Did you already know her identity wasn't simple? There are tens of thousands of employees in the company, and there are at least 5 intern assistants like her. We don't have any communication except for work. Why would I investigate her identity? Mo Jingshan was obviously not interested in this topic. It seemed that no matter what Rong Yan did to him, he had only met her a few times and he didn't even remember her name at first. Really? Jean Wan's face was cold. As far as I know, CEO Mo, you're very observant. Didn't you suspect that a person who approached you with ulterior motives, and a person who worked in your company in Los Angeles, suddenly appeared in High City? Why would I suspect? I can count the number of times I've returned to China in the past 2 years with one hand. I've only seen her a few times, and the total time I've seen her is less than 2 hours. Do you think I should have any special impression of her? Jean Wan looked at him. The man's expression was indifferent when he talked about others, but his tone was patient. This patience seemed to be only for her. She hesitated for a moment, and then there was a knock on the door. Knock, knock, come in. The man's words were so fast that Jean Wan was caught off guard. Before she could get down from his lap, Xiaohu had pushed the door open and entered. The moment he entered, he saw CEO Ji sitting on Mo Jingshan's lap. CEO Mo had one arm around her waist and the other on her beautiful skirt. No matter how he looked at it, this posture was like that of an idle drama between a handsome man and a beautiful woman. Xiaohu stood at the door in a daze, unable to believe it for a long time. My God, CEO Mo and CEO Ji's relationship had progressed too quickly. Just yesterday, he was clearly trying to take care of CEO Ji's pain during her period. Xiaohu had thought that CEO Mo was preparing to move the other party's heart bit by bit and slowly occupy the high ground. He did not expect that today, he would actually hug her. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at him. Close the door if you come in. If you don't, then leave. Xiaohu came back to his senses and hurriedly took a step inside, but he didn't dare to get close to them. He only glanced outside when he closed the door before closing it. CEO Mo, the second half of the evening party is a charity auction. The organizer has reserved a place for you and CEO Ji. It will begin in about 10 minutes. Do you and CEO Ji want to go over now, or should I inform the organizer that the two of you have gone upstairs to rest? Does it still hurt? Mo Jingshan took a look at Jean Wan, his low voice ringing by her ears. Jean Wan raised her eyes to meet his eyes that were as deep as ink. Because she was being cared for in front of Xiaohu, her face tightened in awkwardness. Seeing Xiaohu's shifty-eyed expression, Jean Wan pursed her lips. It doesn't hurt anymore. Mo Jingshan just wanted to use her sprained ankle as an excuse to hug her. This was not the first time. Perhaps because she had drunk several glasses of champagne before, even though her alcohol tolerance was much better now, the champagne's after-effects were still somewhat strong. Jean Wan raised her hand to touch her forehead as if she had a headache. Mo Jingshan, and you fell on your head? Jean Wan rolled her eyes. No. Mo Jingshan finally put her down. As soon as her feet touched the ground, Jean Wan lowered her head to tidy up her dress. As she bent down, the necklace on her neck fell slightly, and the side of the necklace moved slightly away from her neck. Then Xiao Hu was dumbfounded again. What did he just see? On CEOG's neck, there was an obvious hickey. Not only did he hug her, but it had also developed to a point that he had not expected. Chapter 562. Charity auctions were a common occurrence in the upper class. Usually, the organizers would auction off some treasures, antiques, jewelry, or other meaningful things they had obtained through various unusual means. Although it was called charity, it was indeed charity. A large part of the money would be donated to some domestic legal charities, but it was also a way for men and women in the upper class to communicate. This hotel was very large. The second half of the charity auction would be held in the circular trapezoidal hall behind the banquet hall. The trapezoidal hall was very large. In addition to the stage where the auction items could be displayed, there was also a large open space and a central area. At this time, the auctioneer was already preparing in front. The organizer had arranged the best seats for Mo Jingshan and Jean Wan near the center, where they could see everything on and off the stage. After a brief introduction on the stage, the auctioneer had someone bring out the first auction item. It was a blue diamond that a jewelry mining team had found in the old site of Yugoslavia. This blue diamond was almost half the size of the one Jean Wan owned before, and it was not as transparent as hers. Also, this one had been cut by heavy industry and was not as valuable as her round one. But such an ordinary blue diamond had a starting price of 50 million yuan. Pure blue diamonds were very rare in this world. Most of them were bought by various collectors or rich people. Many people present immediately caused a stir, and the sound of bidding was endless. Jean Wan sat in her seat and casually glanced at the man next to her. CEO Mo, do you think this blue diamond looks good? Mo Jingshan glanced at her, unperturbed. Don't you have a better one in your hands? How can this kind of thing catch your eye? Jean Wan curved her lips. The starting price of such a low-end blue diamond is 50 million yuan. I'm very curious, how much did you spend to get that blue diamond? Mo Jingshan did not answer, but there was a trace of a smile in his eyes. She didn't know whether he was laughing at her for not returning the blue diamond to him in the end, or at her for hiding it at home and not daring to wear it. Jean Wan originally just wanted to inquire about the price of that blue diamond, but seeing his smiling eyes, she immediately turned her head away and did not continue to ask. The bidding had already exceeded 120 million yuan. Jean Wan didn't think that the blue diamond was worth this price, but these people still kept bidding. She couldn't help but suspect that the one in her hand was probably worth more than 1 billion yuan. 1 billion yuan. Not everyone could afford it, not to mention it was just a small diamond. For such a long time, Mo Jingshan had never given her roses or jewelry to make her happy. However, he would take off his suit and put aside his noble and cold demeanor to make dinner for her alone. He would even risk his life for her. However, to make up for the fact that she had never worn a wedding ring, he reserved that blue diamond for her and allowed her to make it into a necklace or a ring according to her preferences. Everything he did respected her wishes and preferences. Today, she was wearing a set of VCA jewelry on her neck and ears. It was most likely because the bouquet of roses that the auntie's son gave her had angered him. It was rare for Mo Jingshan to be so superficial. In order to help her match her dress, he casually took out a set of priceless jewelry. Clearly, this man thought that this kind of superficial behavior would cause her to roll her eyes, so he kissed a mark on her neck. This way, even if she didn't want to wear a necklace, she had to. This man, even if he was superficial, could not hide his black-bellied nature. By the side, an old CEO of a certain company saw that Jean Wan kept staring at the blue diamond on the stage and couldn't help but say, "CEO G, this blue diamond was dug out from the old site of Yugoslavia. Let's not talk about its value, just its origin and luster are definitely worth fighting for. It's also very valuable." "Is that so?" Jean Wan gave the old CEO a polite smile. The old CEO thought that he had spoken her mind and was about to continue chatting with her when he suddenly met the man's indifferent gaze. "CEO Chen, your company started in the jewelry industry in China. I thought you had a good taste in appraising jewelry and diamonds, but your words just now really make me doubt your company's taste in jewelry and the quality of all jewelry and diamonds." The old CEO's face stiffened and he smiled awkwardly. "I was just chatting with CEO G. I didn't mean to say that this blue diamond was top grade, but after all girls like this kind of thing. CEO G didn't bid, so I thought she didn't know the value and rarity of a blue diamond, so I just chatted with her casually. I didn't mean what you said, CEO Jean Wan. It turned out that this was a jeweler. No wonder she was not familiar with him. As a jeweler, he really had no conscience to say such words and say that this kind of blue diamond was worth collecting. Clearly, he hadn't raised his paddle to bid in the past half a day." Jean Wan continued to look at the stage expressionlessly. The final price was 150 million yuan, and it was won by a chubby man. Then 2 more auction items were brought up, both of which were also valuable. The last auction item was a famous painter, Zhang Daqian's peach blossom painting. Jean Wan looked at the painting, and a trace of interest finally appeared in her eyes. This peach blossom painting, she remembered seeing it in the Ji family's study when she was a child. At that time, Ji Hongwen treated this painting as a treasure. It was said that he spent more than 100 million yuan to buy it, but later, for some reason, this painting was no longer hung in the study, and she hadn't seen it again in recent years. By chance, she asked the family servant, and the servant said that Director Ji owed someone a favor, and the other party didn't want anything but this painting. In the end, Director Ji had to reluctantly give it up. This was something that happened many years ago. She didn't expect that this famous painting of Zhang Daqian had been circulated to this kind of auction. In this kind of place, the price of this painting would only be higher. Jean Wan had been uninterested in all the other auction items and had almost fallen asleep, but now, when the peach blossom painting came out, her eyes were shining in that direction. Mo Jingshan didn't speak, but the jeweler sitting next to her said, "CEO G, you're so young, but you're not interested in the jewelry being auctioned, but in this kind of antique painting?" Chapter 563. When this painting was still hung in the Ji family's study, she was still young and her mother was still alive. At that time, it was her mother who carried her into the study to get something, and she even touched the painting. Jean Wan thought that no matter how much this painting cost, she should buy it and hang it in the Ji family study. This painting is indeed one of the 10 most valuable paintings in the country. Mo Jingshan's calm voice rang, and the man's eyes slowly fell on her face. "Do you want it?" Jean Wan was about to speak when she suddenly heard some voices not far away. She turned around and saw that 2 rows away from their seats, about 6 or 7 meters away, the Rong siblings were sitting there. Someone got up to go out and walked past them, and their voice reached here. Jean Wan's eyes happened to meet Rong Cheng's, and the indifference on Rong Cheng's face suddenly turned into obvious coldness. Jean Wan, it was just that his sister was rejected by the man she liked, and the man his sister liked showed up here with a female companion. Did the general manager of the Rong Corporation have to show such a cold face to others? It was said that the rich young men in the capital circle were used to being arrogant, but now she knew what was real arrogance. Jean Wan withdrew her gaze indifferently. Rong Yen sat beside Rong Cheng and kept her eyes on Mo Jingshan. The auction had been going on for almost an hour, and Mo Jingshan had been sitting by Jean Wan's side the whole time, nor had he bid for any item. However, Mo Jingshan just sat there and did not move. In such a noisy environment, he was not drowned by the noisy crowd at all. Instead, he gave people a sense of isolation and solitude. The bidding had begun. A famous painting that was sold for more than 100 million yuan more than a decade or even nearly 20 years ago had been sold for 300 million yuan in the blink of an eye. Jin Wan had wanted to wait until no one else bid, so that the price would not be driven up too high. However, the bidding was endless. When it reached the high point of 300 million yuan, it began to increase by 10 million yuan, and no one directly increased it by 100 million yuan. Jin Wan had been staring at the painting, thinking of the scene when her mother liked to carry her back and forth in the study when she was still alive. She didn't notice when Rong Yan and Rong Cheng sat behind them. Suddenly, she heard the brother and sister talking behind them. "Brother, this peach blossom painting and the painting that Grandpa used to like were both made by Zhang Daqian. Grandpa has always liked Zhang Daqian's paintings. Shall we buy this one for him?" After that, Rong Yan added, "The price won't rise much now. I think it will stop bidding within 500 million yuan. It's just right to keep the price within 500 million yuan." As soon as Rong Yan said this, Jin Wan's eyelids twitched. 500 million yuan? MN Group was rising. Although it had a lot of assets, she still had a lot of money. GG Group was still in. Jin Wan Rong. Although Xin Wan, the CEO she had a company's company, she Nuan. After all, this was not a small amount. Even for a company like the MN Group, it was not a small amount. She did not have a very solid foundation, and a lot of the money was still in the company's liquid funds, which were used for the stable operation of the company's various projects. She had planned to sell it at the price of 200 or 300 million yuan. Did the Rong siblings also like this painting? Jin Wan raised her eyes to look at the painting on the stage. Her expression was indifferent and she did not speak. At this moment, the auctioneer said, "At present, Zhang Daqian's peach blossom painting has reached the high price of 390 million yuan. Does anyone want to continue bidding? At present, none of the famous paintings in China has exceeded the price of 400 million yuan. I wonder if it will break this price today." 400 million yuan. Rong Cheng raised his paddle. The auctioneer's eyes lit up as he looked at Rong Cheng, who had raised his hand to bid. "Good, this is a historic moment. Is there anyone else who wants to continue bidding?" The atmosphere in the hall was tense. No matter how famous Zhang Daqian's paintings were, the market price was more than 200 million yuan. Now the price had risen to 400 million yuan. They couldn't help but wonder if Zhang Daqian was deliberately driving up the price. No matter how much he liked to collect, at this price, the paintings that he hid at home every day were not things that he could bring out. Other than satisfying his hobby, there was no other value. After considering for a long time, the voices in the room gradually became much weaker, and no one continued to bid. There shouldn't be any more bids, right? Rong Yan sat beside Rong Cheng and whispered. From time to time, Jin Wan gently tapped her knee with the number plate in her hand. She stared at the painting, struggling in her heart. Should she bid a high price for this painting that she had seen with her mother when she was a child, for something that the Ji family had lost, or should she consider that MN Group was on the rise and needed money? 500 million yuan was enough for the company to do a lot of things. 400 million yuan going once, 400 million yuan going twice. The auctioneer solemnly announced, 400 million yuan going. Jin Wan was about to raise the number plate in her hand to bid, but the moment she raised her hand, the man next to her had already raised his hand. His low, indifferent voice rang like thunder in the trapezoidal hall, 600 million yuan. There was a strange silence in the hall for a moment, and then there was a burst of gasps. 600 million yuan. In the history of domestic auctions, this was the only calligraphy and painting that had reached this price. Although Zhang Daqian's calligraphy and painting were expensive, this price was still too high. Many people in the hall had given up when the price was just 400 million yuan, let alone this price, which directly raised the threshold to the point that no one dared to bid. There was silence in the hall. The Rong siblings didn't expect that Imo Jingshan, who rarely participated in auctions like this, would suddenly bid. Rong Yen instantly pursed her lips and looked at the cold back of the man in front of her. 600 million yuan going once, 600 million yuan going twice. 600 million yuan going thrice, sold. The auctioneer excitedly hammered the price. Rong Cheng's face was very pale. He got up at the moment the hammer fell, and Rong Yen hurriedly held him. Brother. Jean Wan had been sitting in her seat and didn't get up. She didn't know why Mo Jingshan offered such a high price. If it was just to help her win this painting, she could understand. After all, not to mention the wealth of Shine Group, even the financial resources of the former Mo Corporation in the country couldn't be compared with those of ordinary people. But to buy a painting with 600 million yuan, she felt her heart ache. Hearing Rong Cheng's angry voice behind her, she vaguely felt that because Rong Cheng had tripped her up in the bathroom, Mo Jingshan didn't leave any room for him to bid for this painting and didn't even give him the qualification to compete with him. Chapter 564. Rong Yen stopped Rong Cheng, got up, and walked behind Mo Jingshan. Jean Wan had no interest in what she wanted to say or do. She sat in her seat and didn't get up. Rong Yen came over and said, Mr. Mo, my grandfather has always liked Zhang Daiqian's paintings. Recently, it's his birthday. I wanted to give this painting to him with my brother, but I didn't expect you to like it too. But I haven't heard that you are interested in antiques or paintings. Are you going to give it to Grandfather Mo? Hearing Rong Yen call Grandfather Mo, Jean Wan's face became colder, but she still sat in her seat and listened quietly, without any movement. How about this? I know Grandfather Mo's birthday is still 2 or 3 months away. Mr. Mo, why don't you give this Tao Yuan painting to us? We'll pay the price of 600 million yuan. My brother and I will give this painting to Grandfather Mo. When Grandfather Mo celebrates his birthday, my brother and I will go to High City to congratulate him and give him a famous painting or antique that is more valuable than Tao Yuan painting. In this way, the Rong family and the Mo family will have a long-term friendship. Jean Wan silently glanced at the crowd in the distance that was gradually shrinking. What a good plan. Although Mo Jingshan had attended many banquets and charity auctions, he rarely bid for anything in his own name. Today's painting was a rare occasion. Rong Yen was going to take away the painting under Mo Jingshan's name and go to the Mo family with the excuse of congratulating him. After all, she owed him a favor. Even if she took the initiative to go to the Mo family, it wouldn't be unreasonable. Who said this Rong Yen was a little white rabbit? She was clearly a woman who couldn't be any smarter. 600 million yuan was not a small amount, but it was clear that the Rong siblings wouldn't think much of it. On the contrary, Jean Wan had been struggling with the price of 500 million yuan for a long time. Jean Wan expressionlessly slapped the number in her hand onto the seat that had been left empty after the old CEO had left. But as soon as she looked up, she met the man's dark and deep eyes. She held her breath. She was controlling her emotions and didn't show anything. The painting wasn't hers anyway. Just now, after the auction, he had glanced at her, making her think that he had bid for this painting for her. But now, he had asked Rong Yen to come and bargain with him. It sounded like Rong Yen wanted to buy the painting at the same price and then go to Grandfather Mo's birthday party in the future. This was a very friendly way, and there was no reason for him to refuse. After all, the Rong clan was indeed qualified to have dealings with the Mo clan. With the Rong family status, there was no reason for Mo Jingshan to make enemies for the Mo family. Jean Wan's expression was expressionless. She lowered her eyes to pack up the bag on her lap, no longer looking at him. She heard the man say softly and lightly, "As far as I know, Elder Rong's obsession with calligraphy and painting is indeed extraordinary. You don't have to pay this 600 million yuan, and you don't have to care how much it is." Jean Wan paused in taking out her phone from her bag. Was he planning to give the painting to Elder Rong? Jean Wan had been controlling all her emotions, but now she clenched her cell phone a little tighter. Mo Jingshan watched as she quietly lowered her gaze to look for her phone in her bag. His lips curved slightly. Rong Yen also thought he meant this, and her eyes were suddenly tinged with surprise. Mr. Mo, you'll be in time for my grandfather's birthday when you're in Beijing. Are you going to attend his birthday party? She was asking him if he was going to give the painting to her grandfather in his own name. Rong Qing sneered. CEO Mo, since you despise the Rong family so much, why do you have to give the painting to the Rong family? We can afford this 600 million yuan. CEO Mo, you don't have to be so generous. Rong Sheng had been suppressing his anger since the incident in the bathroom. He didn't intend to lose face at all and even wanted to win back some of it now. But to everyone's surprise, Mo Jingshan's next words were, "When did I say I would give this painting to the Rong family?" Rong Yan's expression froze, and Rong Cheng's face also darkened. Rong Yan gradually widened her eyes. Mr. Mo Jingshan's calm, deep eyes met Rong Yan's stunned gaze, and he said indifferently, "This painting is not for anyone's birthday." Miss Rong, you're thinking too much. Rong Yan. Then why did you buy it? You don't like these things. Only Miss Rong wants to buy it for Elder Rong, but I can't buy it for someone more meaningful. Rong Yan immediately bit her lip. Rong Cheng's face was cold, and his tone was full of displeasure. Rong Yan, don't you understand? President Mo is clearly telling you that he won't give this painting to you, nor does he intend to give it to the Rong family. President Mo is a businessman, so he must have his reasons for bidding for this famous painting at such a high price. I'm afraid he didn't bid for this painting for you, but for Miss Ji. Rong Cheng's tone was very unhappy, and he didn't intend to let his sister and Mo Jingshan have any entanglement. This time, he stood on the same side as the elders of the family. He would no longer help Rong Yan chase men, but would only make Rong Yan stay away from men like Mo Jingshan in the future. Was this why Mo Jingshan listened to Rong Yan's words so patiently? He couldn't treat a family like the Rong family the same way he treated other flowers and plants. It was better to let the other party see the situation clearly and take the initiative to let go, so as to avoid endless entanglement in the future. After hearing Rong Cheng's words, Jean Wan didn't speak, but she had already understood Mo Jingshan's intention. She didn't say anything, but turned her eyes, only to see that Mo Jingshan had been standing by her side the whole time. His black shirt and trousers were full of elegance and nobility. Even in front of the famous heir of the Rong family in Jing City, he didn't reduce his aura at all. At this moment, Rong Cheng looked as if he couldn't wait to take Rong Yan away, lest they were really looked down upon by the Mo family of High City. Jean Wan looked at Mo Jingshan with a complicated look in her eyes. This man's calm attitude and meticulous handling of every matter were so reasonable, and his strategy was amazing. This was one of the things that others couldn't catch up to, but it was also one of the things that she loved and hated. It was just like the reason why she was so cruel to divorce him. Later on, she finally found out the reason. Everything was so reasonable that she couldn't hate him even if she wanted to. But what on earth did she blame him for? She blamed him for his calmness when he was in control of everything. She blamed him for his calmness when he stabbed her heart again and again. She blamed him for everything he did. He never wavered, but he was inhumanly calm. Chapter 565. Mo Jingshan glanced at Jean Wan, who had been sitting there quietly. What? You hesitated for a long time and didn't know whether to buy it or not. I bought it for you, but now I'm too embarrassed to take it back. Jean Wan, all her complex emotions disappeared as soon as the man spoke. Jean Wan saw that a staff member had carried the rolled-up painting to her side. She looked at the painting and snorted. CEO Mo, you're so rich. How can I, a small person in charge of MN Group, compare to you? The man's thin lips curved into a faint smile. You don't want it? Then I'll give this painting to the Rong family. Yes. Jean Wan reached out and picked up the painting as soon as the staff member brought it to her, not intending to give it away at all. I thought you had a backbone. Backbone depended on the situation. This painting was what she wanted, and it was closely related to many of her childhood memories. Besides, why did she give it to the wrong family? Knowing that he said this deliberately, Jean Wan still chose to take the bait. Anyway, she didn't pay for it. At most, she would give up her dignity, and this famous painting worth hundreds of millions of yuan would be easily won. What was wrong with it? She wasn't a hot-blooded young man who would suffer because of his pride. She was very sensible now. As long as it was beneficial to her, she would definitely be able to yield and stand tall according to the circumstances. Jean Wan held the rolled-up painting in her arms, which was protected by a layer of transparent wrapping paper. She looked down at the painting in her arms and gradually gave an imperceptible smile. Thank you. When I give this painting to my father, I'll tell him that you bought it for him. Seeing that she was in a good mood, the man's eyes were still full of indulgence. It doesn't matter who gave it to me. It's just a painting. Was it just a painting? Rong Yen had been standing there stiffly, and the expression on her face had been petrified for a long time. Even if the Rong family was rich and powerful, they didn't dare to say that something worth 600 million yuan was just a painting. Earlier, her brother had said that Mo Jingshan had bought this painting for Miss Ji. She had thought that it was impossible. Miss Ji did not seem like someone who would like this kind of thing. She did not expect that it was for her father, and even Mo Jingshan had clearly said so. Jean Wan clearly hadn't said anything. How did he know she wanted it? How would he know that Miss Ji's father would like this kind of thing? Could it be that he liked Miss Ji as much as she liked him? Did he investigate everyone in her family just to get to know her? Or could it be that he and this Miss Ji had other connections and pasts that she couldn't guess? Rong Yan's mouth was full of bitterness. CEOMO, there are many kinds of famous paintings. The more expensive ones can be found abroad. The Rong family has Qi Baisher's 12 landscape screens, which was bought by my grandfather at a foreign auction in his early years and has been treasuring it at home. But he prefers Zhang Daqian's painting. If Miss Ji likes it, we can exchange Qi Baisher's painting for Zhang Daqian's painting. After all, my grandfather's birthday is coming up. Please give me this painting, Miss Ji. Jean Wan didn't seem to be swayed at all. Instead, she felt that Miss Rong was really spoiled. How could she ask someone to give her the painting at this time? Then I'm really sorry, Miss Rong. This painting has been hanging in my father's study since I was young. Later, for some reason, it was transferred to someone else's hands. Now, I'm just looking for something that originally belonged to my family. Even if you give me something 10 times more expensive in exchange for something this meaningful, I won't agree. Jean Wan said flatly, when it comes to paintings, my father also has works by great masters such as Qi Baisher and Zhang Daqian in modern times and Tang Yin in ancient times. But this is the only one, which is of great significance to our family. I can't bear to part with it, but I won't. With that, Jean Wan seemed to unconsciously hold the painting tighter in her arms. Mo Jingshan looked at her subconscious movement, raised his eyebrows, and smiled. Did she think no one could snatch it away? Seeing him smiling, Jean Wan glared back at him and simply put the painting back into the hands of the staff. Anyway, after leaving here, the staff would send the painting to the hotel where they stayed intact. Rong Yen looked at their eyes. It was clear that no one else could intervene. Jean Wan's angry attitude and Mo Jingshan's indulgent and doting eyes were obviously because he liked her. Otherwise, no woman could be so angry in front of Mo Jingshan. Rong Cheng's face was as cold as an iceberg, and Rong Yan's eyes were a little red. Since this painting is of great significance to Miss Ji, I apologize for disturbing you just now. With that, Rong Yan turned to take Rong Cheng's arm. When she was about to leave, she suddenly heard Jean Wan's indifferent voice. Miss Rong, didn't you just sprain your ankle? Have you recovered so soon? Rong Yan paused and didn't look back. When Rong Cheng was about to look back, she took his hand hard and didn't let her brother stand up for her again. After all, what happened in the bathroom just now was indeed their fault. Jin Wan didn't force them to apologize when Mo Jingshan rushed over and didn't make a fuss. Instead, she chose to keep the peace, which showed that Jin Wan had a sense of propriety. Now if she and her brother made a fuss here, it would seem that the Rong family was unreasonable. Seeing the Rong siblings leave, Jin Wan's eyes moved away from their backs. When she was about to leave, she saw Mo Jingshan's eyes fall on her face. When their eyes met, Jin Wan thought of the painting just now and immediately withdrew her eyes, saying, "I'll return the money to you when we go back." However, the man smiled lightly and said in a low voice, "Pay with your body." Jin Wan took a look at him. "Okay." When the man's eyes lit up and he looked at her, she suddenly smiled again. "I can pay with my body, but only tonight." Mo Jingshan, there were still 2 days before her period ended. It was obviously an empty promise. The 600 million yuan would be wasted on her, and there would be no return. The man glanced at her expressionlessly, turned around, and walked out with his back to her. Jin Wan watched the man's unhappy back view, and the corners of her lips unconsciously curved into a smile. Jin Wan struggled to keep up with Mo Jingshan's footsteps. Just now, she thought that Mo Jingshan just didn't want to talk to her because of her empty promise, but it turned out that Mo Jingshan walked very fast and didn't even look back. Chapter 566. It wasn't until Mo Jingshan got into the car that Jin Wan noticed that the man didn't look back when he got into the car, leaving her alone outside the car, that she realized that Mo Jingshan was really angry. Oh right, a man who had been holding back for more than 3 years finally heard her promise to repay him with her body. In the end, it happened to be during her menstrual period. No man would be able to tolerate this kind of provocation. But was he really unable to tolerate it? When she had a stomachache, didn't he warm her belly while kissing her in bed? How could he be angry? He was already so shameless and had taken advantage of her so many times over the past few days. How could he still be angry? Jin Wan thought for a long time, considering whether to continue taking this car or to take a taxi back to the hotel. He could be angry. She didn't intend to coax him. But when she thought of the painting just now, she realized that she didn't spend a penny. He did have good intentions. Jin Wan finally made up her mind. When Xiao Hu came to open the car door for her, she lifted the hem of her dress and got into the car. She turned to see the man who was already sitting in the car. After thinking for a moment, she raised her hand and patted his shoulder generously. "You see, I didn't mean anything else just now. You really should thank me for the painting." The man glanced at her because she put her hand on his shoulder so openly, brushed her hand away expressionlessly, and closed his eyes. Jin Wan. She hadn't finished speaking. She had to thank him, lest he said she was an ingrate again. This man didn't seem to accept her thanks at all. Did he close his eyes and intend to not communicate with her for the time being? She wanted to thank him out of goodwill, but she was rejected. She withdrew her hand and no longer looked at him. Xiao Hu got into the car and drove steadily in the driver's seat, not looking at the situation in the back seat. Jin Wan sat there, and next to her was the man who had his eyes closed and was ignoring her. Xiao Hu also did not speak. The car was extremely quiet. She simply bent down to take off the pair of high-heeled shoes that were more than 10 centimeters long. After wearing them all night, she wanted to relax her feet. However, when she bent down, her stomach felt uncomfortable and she quietly hissed. The man beside him did not move at all, and even Xiao Hu continued to drive quietly. Perhaps Xiao Hu felt that the atmosphere in the car was a little strange, so he reached out to turn on the music in the car, and a soothing light music played in the car. Jin Wan had just taken off her shoes, stretched out her little feet, kicked her legs in the car, and then gently placed her feet on a relatively clean spot in the middle. She was thinking. After all, Mo Jingshan had given her enough face today. Not only did he not make her suffer a loss, from the gown to the diamond jewelry to the famous painting at night, it didn't seem right for her to continue holding back her temper. But in the blink of an eye, she saw that the man had his eyes closed and was completely ignoring her, so she pulled her face back and glared at him for a long time. The man suddenly opened his eyes and happened to meet her even more glaring eyes. Jean Wan had no time to move her eyes away and immediately met his eyes. The cold man looked at her indifferently, then glanced at her bare, fair, and tender little feet that were placed on the seat between the two of them. Half of her feet were covered by the long gauze skirt, faintly discernible. He said coldly, "Put on your shoes." "I've been wearing high-heeled shoes all night. I'll just loosen my feet. I'll put them on as soon as I get out of the car." Jean Wan withdrew her gaze. Glancing at her little feet that seemed to be reaching toward him, and her toes unconsciously curled up under his gaze, Mo Jingshan only felt that his blood was surging more violently. He closed his eyes again and frowned. A woman's on her period. Can the soles of her feet be so cold? Aren't you afraid of catching a cold? It's not cold in the car. Seeing that Mo Jingshan seemed to be very unhappy, Jean Wan restrained herself and thought for a moment before putting on her shoes. These shoes were matched by the designer when she was trying on the dress today. Although they were branded shoes and the style was very beautiful, they were only suitable for wearing at a banquet. It was very tiring to walk in them. She wore them all night and even now felt that her ankles were a little sore. The atmosphere in the car fell into silence again. Jean Wan took out her cell phone from her bag and looked at it for a while. Some notices had popped up on some news apps. They were all news about the grand banquets and charity auctions held in Beijing, but most of them were very normal, without any messy scandals. After looking at them for a while, she put down her cell phone and turned to see that Mo Jingshan still had his eyes closed. It was clear that he didn't want to see her tonight. She looked back at the car behind them, which was the car of the auction staff. They were responsible for following them and sending the paintings to the hotel. After all, she owed him a big favor. Jean Wan thought for a while and decided to coax him. After all, it was 600 million yuan. That painting is indeed very meaningful to me. When my mother was still alive, she would often carry me to my father's study. Even though Ji Hongwen is not my biological father, this deep-rooted affection from a young age is still there. Retrieving this painting has also allowed me to retrieve a lot of things from when I was a child. In my heart, there is a great sense of satisfaction. The man didn't open his eyes. So, let's not talk about anything else. Just talking about this painting, I'm really grateful to you. I've been struggling with the price of this painting. After all, MN Group is now on the rise, and I have to think carefully about something worth hundreds of millions of yuan. It's really a difficult problem for me to choose sensitively or rationally. Thank you for helping me make the choice. Mo Jingshan frowned and sneered. Since you're so grateful, why do you only thank me verbally? Sure enough, he was still angry about her deliberately deceiving him just now. Jean Wan played dumb. CEO Mo, you're so rich. How else do you want me to thank you? I said I would return it to you after returning to High City, and I really don't intend to owe you anything, but what else do you want me to do for you except verbally thanking you? Earlier on, Mo Jingshan had already opened his eyes. He turned to look at her. The woman was smiling. Her cheeks were overly fair and seemed to glow in the dim car. Her eyes were also bright and bright. Coupled with her expression of pretending to be ignorant and deliberately avoiding certain sensitive topics, she appeared especially lively and fragrant. Mo Jingshan felt his blood rush more violently. He had never been a lustful person. These years, he only treated Jean Wan differently. However, in the past 3 years, she had changed too much. This woman's casual frown and smile was like an addictive poison to him. Chapter 567. Mo Jingshan just looked at her, saying nothing, but his eyes were deep. Jean Wan looked at him and saw that he was staring at her expressionlessly, so she simply avoided his eyes. I've been busy all day. I'm tired. It will take a long time for us to get to the hotel, right? Then I'll take a nap in the car. With that, she closed her eyes. Mo Jingshan's face darkened slightly. But when he saw Jin Wan leaning against the car door and curling up as if she was really going to sleep for a while, he sighed almost imperceptibly. This woman was really full of tricks and did whatever she wanted in front of him. Sure enough, she relied on her own strength. The car stopped in front of the Shengtang Hotel. After Xiao Hu stopped the car, he took the time to look back through the rearview mirror. CEO Mo, as soon as he said the word, Mo Jingshan gave him a cold look, motioning him to shut up. Xiao Hu immediately swallowed. Although he was already used to it, he was still a little shocked to see the scene behind him. Did the cold and aloof CEO Mo he had heard before change his mind, or was the news he heard just hearsay? He actually saw CEO G sleeping against CEO Mo's body. And CEO Mo was holding her in a good mood? CEO Mo and CEO G were really, not only was there something going on, but the situation was not ordinary. Xiao Hu abruptly looked away and didn't dare to look again. He had noticed that Jin Wan seemed to have fallen asleep against the car door, but he really didn't pay much attention to how she ended up leaning against CEO Mo whatever. At this time, he just needed to get out of the car quickly. Xiao Hu got out of the car but didn't take the car key away, leaving the space in the car for them. Mo Jingshan looked at the quiet sleeping face in his arms and scratched her face with his fingers. She fell asleep and suddenly fell to his side when the car turned a corner. Coincidentally, she almost rested her head on his thigh, but he just caught her and held the back of her head with his palm. Then the woman arched into his arms as if sleeping very comfortably. At this moment, the woman in a long gauze dress was bending over on the seat behind him. Using the strength of his hand supporting the back of her head, she directly lay in his arms and continued to sleep. No matter how defensive she was when she slept, as long as she was in his arms, she would definitely continue to sleep without the slightest intention of being woken up. It was very quiet in the car, and it was already 11:30 at night. In this prosperous area of Jing City, the number of cars passing by at night didn't decrease, and from time to time, the headlights of the cars flashed by outside. Mo Jingshan didn't rush to wake Jin Wan up. He even felt that he was particularly fond of her quiet and obedient look when she didn't resist or glare at him because of his affection. He gently stroked her hand with his fingers. Although it was not comfortable to sleep in the car, if she planned to sleep in his arms like this all night, he would let her sleep. After an unknown period of time, Mo Jingshan sat in the quiet car, watching the heavy traffic outside. His fingers ran through her hair again, and he suddenly heard her mutter something. "What are you talking about?" Mo Jingshan asked. Mo Jingshan, the man frowned. Jin Wan thought she couldn't fall asleep in the car, but she didn't expect that not only did she fall asleep, but she also seemed to sleep very well and had a dream. In the dream, she saw Mo Jingshan sitting in the office of Shine Group. As she had seen him every time, he was serious at work, full of the aura of a superior, and dealt with any matter in the company swiftly and decisively. When he looked in the direction of the door, he was even more handsome. On this man's face, there was silence and indifference, but also his unique beauty. She was about to go in and say hello to him when she saw there was another person behind him. Rong Yan. He looked calmly at Jin Wan in front of the door, then turned around to take the coffee that Rong Yan had just made for him and touched Rong Yan's hand. Rong Yan blushed and stood beside him with a sweet smile. There were still some documents in Rong Yan's hand, so she leaned over his desk to talk about the documents with him. When she leaned over, her movement was so big that even the scenery under her collar was exposed. Mo Jingshan seemed to be moved by this. He reached out and circled Rong Yan into his arms, put her on his lap, and then the two of them began to hug and kiss in the office. Jin Wan was stunned and rushed in to pull Rong Yan away from his arms, but the two of them not only hugged each other tightly, but even when she reached out to touch them, she found that her hands touched nothing on their bodies. She couldn't feel anything at all. The two of them were still kissing unscrupulously in front of her. Rong Yen endured Imo Jingshan's kiss and took off her shoes. Wearing the kind of stockings she often wore in the office, she wriggled in Imo Jingshan's arms, looking innocent and sexy. The two of them kissed passionately as if there was no one else around them, as if they were going to take the office to bed at will. Seeing Imo Jingshan holding Rong Yan's face, their lips were glued to each other as if they could not be separated. Jin Wan felt that she was about to explode. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push them away. Yes, when Rong Yan was with Imo Jingshan, she was not in High City at all. She was still in London. How could she stop all this? But Imo Jingshan, this shameless man, had just supported her and bought her a painting, but in the blink of an eye, he was hugging Rong Yan. He was a scum. Scum from head to toe. Imo Jingshan, bastard, Imo Jingshan. As Jin Wan fell asleep, she suddenly furrowed her brows as though she was enduring a great anger. She even slapped his body twice with her hand, and as though she was still angry, her feet kicked against the car door. Imo Jingshan pressed down on her hands that were clenched into fists in her sleep and leaned close to her lips to hear her words clearly. In the end, all he heard was her calling his name again and scolding him. The man's handsome face froze and he coldly narrowed his eyes at the woman who didn't forget to scold him in her sleep. In her dream, Jin Wan suddenly felt that the air around her was not very good, as if there was some kind of pressure. She tried to wave her hand but seemed to be held. She subconsciously opened her eyes and was caught off guard by a pair of deep, dark eyes. They were as deep as ink, like a whirlpool of attraction, sucking her in the silent deep sea and leaving her nowhere to escape. Chapter 568. As the man suddenly approached, Jin Wan's face tightened. The messy images in her dream overlapped with the man in front of her, and she subconsciously pushed him away. In the end, because she pushed him too hard and seemed to dislike his intimacy, the man looked at her coldly. What strange things did you dream of? Jin Wan's face turned red, and she looked at him coldly. Did you dream of something strange? Jin Wan, her brain didn't realize it until now. Oh. It turned out to be a dream. She dreamt that Imo Jingshan and Rong Yan were kissing each other in the office. Why did you get so close to me just now? Jin Wan hadn't recovered from the shocking scenes in her dream, and her tone was full of distance and even a bit sarcastic. Imo Jingshan sneered. Did you see it clearly? Did I get close to you, or did you suddenly lean into my arms and hold my shirt when you fell asleep? Jin Wan looked down at the marks on his shirt that she had just pressed against him, pursed her lips, and then turned to look out of the car window, only to find that the car was parked in the parking lot of Enchanting Hotel. When did you arrive? Why didn't you wake me up? She asked. Imo Jingshan only narrowed his eyes because she suddenly became much colder after waking up. The man's ink-black eyes were cold. What on earth did you dream of just now? Jin Wan glanced at him. Why do you care what I dream of? If I didn't hear it wrong, you just scolded me in your dream? Jin Wan, did he hear it? Did she have the habit of talking in her sleep? Why didn't she know it herself? But when she thought about it, it didn't seem good for her to vent her anger on him because of a dream, but the second miss of the Jing City family really gave her a knot in her heart. She was simply a drama queen. She said he didn't have a woman by his side when she pursued him, and she said it was fair and aboveboard, but in fact, it was just an excuse to pursue a man. Why did she have to find so many excuses for herself? Why did she hate Rong Yan so much? Although she didn't have much contact with Imo Jingshan when she was in High City, she was not as straightforward as in Shuyan. At least when in Shuyan was Imo Jingshan's secretary, she was absolutely smart and knew what to say and what to do. Although she used to be one of Jin Wan's rivals in love, at least in Shuyan was not so disgusting. She knew Imo Jingshan wouldn't do that in her dream, but she still couldn't put on a good face. She just glanced at him again and didn't answer but asked, "It's so late. Why don't you get out of the car?" Imo Jingshan's face didn't change, but fortunately, he didn't ask her about the dream. She felt that she must have scolded him and seriously provoked him. Jean Wan placed her hand on the car door and was about to alight when she turned back to see that the man's expression had not changed. She couldn't help but ask, "What exactly did I scold you about earlier?" Mo Jingshan sneered. "You're asking me? Is this how you treat me now? You can't help but scold me when you're sleeping and dreaming?" Jean Wan looked innocent. "It's just a dream. I dreamed of something unpleasant, so I scolded you." "How do you know I was scolding you?" The man was expressionless. "You called my name and scolded me as a bastard, a disgusting man, and a rogue." Jean Wan, yes, he had polluted the environment of her dream and greatly affected the quality of her sleep. When she saw that scene in her dream, it was polite enough for her to just scold him as a bastard. "Oh, then you may have misheard," Jean Wan said expressionlessly. Jean Wan said deadpan, "I was scolding someone in my dream. I suddenly saw you, so I called your name. You can't blame me for what I said in my sleep. People can dream about anything." Mo Jingshan sneered. "I don't blame you for what you said in your dream, but you blame your dream." Jean Wan, his words seemed to make sense. She became serious and changed the subject. "You're not going back to the hotel? Are you going to stay here tonight?" The man didn't speak. He really wanted to cut open this woman's head to see what was in it and what kind of messy dreams she had. Why did she stare at him with disdain as if he were a stinky rogue as soon as she opened her eyes? If he really wanted to be a rogue, Jean Wan would probably still be living obediently in Aolan International and couldn't get out even if she wanted to. Mo Jingshan got out of the car. Jean Wan quickly put on her shoes, but because the heels were too high, it was inconvenient for her to get out of the car. She reached out to ask him to help her, but the man got out of the car first. When she waved at him to ask him for help, he expressionlessly walked away as if he didn't see her raised hand. She had to get out of the car on her 10-centimeter high heels. She remembered that the car key was still there, so she turned to the driver's seat to pull it out and took the key and the electronic car key to the hotel. The shoes were fine on the flat road, but it was a little difficult to get out of the car. If he didn't help her, then he wouldn't help her. She didn't want to beg him. When entering the hotel, Mo Jingshan seemed to finally remember to look back at her mercifully in case she really couldn't keep up. However, when she came over, she didn't even look at him, turned the car key casually in her hand, leisurely stepped on her 10-centimeter high stilettos, and walked in front of him without looking back. Xiao Hu didn't dare to go back to his room after entering the hotel. After all, the car was just parked there. He was afraid that if there was any problem, he would be able to rush over, so he had been sitting in the hotel lobby on the first floor to rest. As soon as Jean Wan walked in, Xiao Hu came up quickly. "CEOG." Jean Wan threw the key casually, and Xiao Hu caught it in her beautiful and handsome posture. "By the way, CEOG, I've asked them to send the painting to your room." "It's in your room now," Xiao Hu said politely. "Okay, thank you." With that, Jean Wan went straight into the elevator without looking back, as if the man who was so kind and remembered to look back at her had disappeared. Mo Jingshan watched as she elegantly waved her sleeves, leaving not a single cloud behind. His lips curved, and he did not know whether to be angry or to laugh. Xiao Hu came over and stood aside to watch for a moment. The indulgence and helplessness in CEO Mo's eyes, even a big man like him almost melted. How could that CEOG resist CEO Mo for so long? Chapter 569. Jean Wan returned to her room and took a shower. It was already midnight, but she had slept for a long time in the car and did not feel sleepy. After showering and drying her hair, she changed into comfortable pajamas. At this moment, a staff member knocked on the door, saying that CEO Mo had instructed her to prepare brown sugar water for her every night after returning to the hotel. She asked if she wanted to drink it at this late hour and that the kitchen had already prepared it. Jean Wan went to open the door. As she received the brown sugar water and thanked the staff, she suddenly saw that the door opposite her had also opened. The moment she met the man's gaze, Jean Wan immediately shifted her gaze away, refusing to look at him. She held the cup in her hand and turned to return to her room. When the staff member saw Mo Jingshan come out, she turned to him and nodded respectfully. Mr. Mo Jingshan nodded mildly. He glanced at the door that Jean Wan had quickly closed and walked over. Jean Wan was about to drink the brown sugar water after closing the door when she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening behind her. She paused and abruptly turned to glare angrily at the man who had just entered her room. Mo Jingshan, how dare you enter my room so casually again? The man glanced at the nightgown she had just changed into. Do you dress like this every day at home? Jean Wan lowered her head to look at the nightgown she was wearing. It was a dark pink silk nightgown with thin straps, but it was not the tacky kind of dark pink. It looked very sexy on her. Xiao Ba had bought this nightgown for her when she was in England. It was said that it had cost Xiao Ba half a month's salary. The silk material was very comfortable, and Jean Wan liked to wear it. In the past 2 years, she had often worn it at home. This kind of silk nightgown with thin straps was only comfortable on her, but it was not the same for a man. Jean Wan glanced at her exposed shoulders and collarbone, as well as the slightly visible cleavage on her chest. She pursed her lips and took a step back with the cup in her hands. At the same time, she said, if it's comfortable, then I'll wear it often. Anyway, I'm usually alone at home. This time, I only put some things I'm used to wearing in my suitcase. It's just a nightgown. What's wrong with that? As she spoke, she drank a few mouthfuls of brown sugar water. After drinking more than half a cup, she put the cup down and looked back at the painting worth 600 million yuan on the shelf beside the bed. She paused and said, it's getting late. Don't you have other work to continue tomorrow? I can't delay too many things while I'm on a business trip in Beijing because of my health. Go to bed early. As for this painting, I'm really grateful to you. You've said thank you at least 3 times tonight. How do I know if you're sincere or not? Do you still remember what you promised me? What did she promise? Jean Wan's hands were empty. For a moment, she suddenly felt insecure. She was about to pick up the remaining half cup of brown sugar water, but the moment she put her hand down, her wrist was abruptly grabbed by the man. She was caught off guard and fell into his embrace. The man's chest bumped into her so hard that her nose hurt. Jean Wan's breathing faltered. She raised her head to meet the man's dark gaze that seemed as though something must happen tonight. Her entire body tensed up. What are you doing? You promised. You'll repay me with your body, but only tonight, en? Jean Wan tried to shake off his hand but was unable to do so. Then what about you? You clearly know that I'm on my period. The man lifted her chin with his well-defined fingers. He didn't care whether she was on her period or her period. He pulled her into his arms and pressed his thin lips against hers. Jean Wan abruptly widened her eyes. What did he mean? Could it be that this man had been holding it in to the point of losing his mind? He didn't even care about her period? Was he going to force himself on her? Was he going to fight a bloody battle? Jean Wan had always known, long ago, that if Mo Jingshan wanted to do something, no one would be able to stop him. She rushed to push him away forcefully, opening her mouth to bite down harshly on his lips. With great difficulty, she finally moved away from his embrace. However, due to her nervousness, she stammered, I've only been in Jing City for 3 days. You entered my room on the first day, and you entered my room on the second day. Could it be that you're planning on staying here and not leaving today? Don't force me to fly back to High City tomorrow. Mo Jingshan, you. As she moved back, the man pressed against her. She could only take a step back. However, before she could finish her words, the man held her waist and pulled her back into his embrace. He harshly kissed her, blocking her lips. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes. When she was almost suffocated from the kiss, he finally gave her some breathing space. However, he pressed against her lips and said hoarsely, if you want to sleep, I won't disturb you. You're on your period, and I won't touch you. However, you're dressed like this in front of me. I don't think I should be polite." Hearing this, before Jean Wan could speak, the man's kiss had already entered her mouth. He pried open her teeth and wantonly kissed her, causing her to feel numb and tremble. Jean Wan was kissed by this sudden and violent kiss, and she felt as though all the strength in her body was about to be taken away. When the man abruptly pressed her onto the bed, Jean Wan only had time to cry out softly before she was kissed again. Her waist was circled several inches toward the center of the bed. A few seconds later, the man's hand easily grabbed her wrist that was about to block between the two of them. However, he didn't press her hands to the sides of her body. Instead, he directly yanked them down. Jean Wan's hands trembled. She stared in disbelief at the fire in the man's eyes and bit down harshly on his lips. "Mo Jingshan, what exactly do you want?" The man's hand forcefully pressed her hands there. Jean Wan's face quickly turned red. "You," his ink-black eyes were filled with endless desire. "Just like this. Just like this?" She instantly understood. Damn it. This bastard. She knew that coming to Jing City was equivalent to sending a sheep into a tiger's den. She naively thought that there would be no problem with her period protecting her. However, she neglected that this hateful man had completely treated her as a piece of fat meat that was right next to his mouth. He had never planned on letting her go. His breathing was even heavier than when he had just steadied her. It was hot and heavy, and it sprayed all over the skin of her neck. It was hot and clear, and all her senses and sense of smell were drowned out by the man's scent. Because of this unyielding kiss, she felt as though her entire body was about to soften. Chapter 570. In truth, Jean Wan had never been able to control this man, and right now, Mo Jingshan was showing signs of losing control. How exactly did she provoke him tonight? Just as she was about to suffocate, Jean Wan bit him heavily. She bit down hard, and blood seeped out. She tasted the salty taste. The man withdrew from her mouth, but his lips remained pressed against hers. Their breaths intertwined. Her bite seemed to add a hint of bloodlust and violence to the storm-like intimacy, stirring up something buried deep in the man's bones. It was just a sexy nightgown, but it wasn't enough to make him lose his mind. However, ever since she returned from T-City 3 years ago, he hadn't been satisfied with all the things they had experienced. Once, twice, 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years. The long period of emptiness and longing had transformed into an endless desire for her. Tonight, both of them were very clear-headed. He even knew the special condition of her body. He knew what he was doing, and his rationality had always been above everything else. However, the more clear-headed he was, the more he wanted her. Even if it was in a different way. In the past, no matter what stage they had reached, he had never allowed her to experience this. Mo Jingshan had always thought that he was sufficiently pure and had few desires. In the past 3 years, the occasional physical urges he experienced were only when he dreamed of her at night. Compared to other men, he had very little need for Gu Yusheng. However, every time Jean Wan appeared before him, even if it was an expressionless face, even if it was just a glance toward him, back then, when he brought her to Aolan International after she was injured, only heaven knew how much restraint he had to use to resist touching her. He had to spend a lot of effort to restrain his desire for Jean Wan. Jean Wan, he called her name in a low and hoarse voice, holding her hand. When she tried to break free from his grip, he held her firmly and brought her hand down his body again and again. Jean Wan's head was about to explode. Several times, she tried desperately to withdraw her hand, but tonight, the man clearly did not intend to stop halfway. How could she escape from his grasp so easily? "I originally considered that you weren't feeling well these few days, so I limited my care to you. I've already waited for 3 years, so I'm not in a hurry to wait for a few more days. Don't you think so?" The man's breath was very hot, blowing against her ears. In the quiet room in the middle of the night, the man's sexy and husky voice rang out. You say I'm sanctimonious, you say I'm a refined scum. Haven't you already experienced my more refined scum side a few years ago? I know that you haven't let go of the knot in your heart, so I waited for you patiently and accompanied you. I knew that you weren't mentally prepared, so I restrained myself from hugging and kissing you. Intentionally or unintentionally, the man's lips brushed past her ears. Jean Wan's entire body stiffened. But you promised that it would only be tonight. She was boasting shamelessly because she was still in those few days of the month. Do you really think that I can't touch you just because you're on your period? He chuckled lowly, but it was not as cold and indifferent as usual. The longer he pressed her against the bed and kissed her, the thick, irresistible heat from his body made it impossible for her to avoid him. If you hadn't used such a method to provoke me, perhaps I would have let you off, but this result is what you deserve. Don't pull my hand. Jean Wan's hand was about to melt from the heat. She trembled and tried to push him away, but one of her hands was pulled down, and the other was pressed by the side of her body. He kissed her ear. Answer me. In the few years you've been in London, have you been dressed like this every night? What did it have to do with him how she dressed? Jean Wan glared at him. So what if I have? The man narrowed his eyes. It's very beautiful. Why didn't you wear it at home in the past? Jean Wan, in the past, even if she wore long clothes and long pants at home, he would still strip her clean from top to bottom. Every day and night, she was bullied by this man until she could not straighten her back. How could she dare to dress like this at home? Wasn't that clearly sending herself into his mouth? It was impossible for her to even have a day of rest. How could she offend him by wearing such a nightgown? Jean Wan was somewhat unhappy. She wanted to pull her hand back, but no matter how hard she tried, it was useless. At most, the sensation under her hand would become more and more obvious, and her face would turn redder from the force. Mo Jingshan, don't be so shameless, let go of my hand. There was only one wall lamp in the room. Jean Wan was used to using dark lamps at night to prevent the glare from affecting her sleep. Right now, she was pressed on the bed by the man. Even though she was not considered short, she always appeared petite in front of the man. Her figure was also covered by the man's tall and broad body. Only some shadows fell on her face. The light between the two of them was not obvious, but they could see each other's reflections in the other's eyes. It was dark and heavy. The atmosphere was so ambiguous that it was suffocating. The man suddenly chuckled. Right now, you're the person in charge of a company. You should know that you have to be honest. If you can't do what you promised, it'll be very damaging to your reputation. The moment she finished speaking, Jean Wan was kissed once again. At the same time, her hand regained its freedom. After several seconds, she slowly withdrew her hand, but her eyes were dazed as she stared at the man who was focused on kissing her. Honest, my head. Was she honest? She promised to repay him with her body, but she did not really agree. Who knew that he was actually thinking about this? This man's kissing skills were the same as 3 years ago. She even suspected that in the past 3 years, when he couldn't sleep at night, he had rehearsed the scene of him kissing her again and again in his heart. She had once been kissed by this man until she was dizzy, and now, all her thoughts had almost stopped. She was kissed to the point where she almost forgot where she was. It was only when she felt a chill beneath her legs that she realized her nightgown had been lifted. The man's hand continued moving up without any obstruction until it landed on her lower abdomen. His burning palms caressed her lower abdomen. This time, the gentle caress was different from the previous time when he simply hugged her to warm her abdomen. Jean Wan's hair stood on end. She was stunned for a moment and wanted to retreat, but there was nowhere to retreat. Her lips were still pressed against the man's. Apart from a few whimpers, she could not make any other sounds. Chapter 571. Right now, Jean Wan's figure was even more seductive than 3 years ago. She had been exercising for a long time, and her body was no longer as weak as before. Hearing her words, the man let go of her nightgown and moved closer to her back. He had already touched the button of her underwear, and her body immediately tensed up. In fact, he had not done anything deeper, but Jean hated herself for being so sensitive. She hated that her body always resisted strangers and even disliked them. However, all of Mo Jingshan's hugs and touches seemed to be teasing her, causing her to lose all resistance. The moment the man easily unbuttoned her underwear, Jean trembled and raised her eyes, only to hear the man chuckle by her ear. Then, the kiss landed on her neck and moved downwards bit by bit. When the man's kiss landed on her through the thin nightgown, Jean abruptly couldn't help but turn her body into a taut bow. She raised her head and bit her lips hard to resist this indescribable, almost terrifying tide of passion. The woman's neck appeared particularly seductive because she was raised. Her hair, which was neither too long nor too short, was scattered on the bed. The man's movements continued. Jean couldn't help but bury her head in the man's shoulder, sobbing and whispering, "Mo Jingshan, don't." She could barely stop trembling. Her body, which had not been touched by a man for 3 years, was now sensitive to his incessant touch. It was as though many of the crazy and trembling memories of the night had been stirred up. She had already softened. Even though her hands had been released, she didn't have the strength to push him away. "Don't what?" The man's naughty hands paused on her body and slowly moved down. However, he pressed down forcefully through the thing she had just changed after showering. Jean entire body suddenly felt limp and she almost couldn't breathe. And in less than half a minute, he was even kissing her. At a time like this, when she couldn't do anything and was separated by a white, soft thing, she was actually about to be tortured to the point of insanity. She was angry. Angry because the man knew her body like the back of his hand. Angry because she couldn't withstand his teasing. Even more angry because she hated herself for not living up to his expectations. Under his kisses and teasing, she felt that she was no different from the woman from 3 years ago who would fall under him at any time. As she was kissed dizzily by him, she suddenly felt something cold touch her hand, and all her senses instantly tightened. It was the man's belt buckle. She lowered her head and saw that his belt buckle glowed coldly in the dim room. It was so cold that she shivered. She was forcefully pulled by him to undo his belt with one hand and gripped his clothes with the other. Her eyes trembled. "Mo Jingshan," she gritted her teeth. The uncontrollable discomfort and emptiness in her body almost drowned her, but she couldn't do anything. On the other hand, the man looked at her with a heavy gaze. He firmly pressed her hand on his belt and unbuckled it with her hand. Jean eyes stared at him. In the dim light, she could clearly see the man's handsome face. Even in such a lustful moment, he still appeared excessively calm. His dark, burning eyes stared at her. Only the sweat on his forehead and his breathing that was heavier than usual made him look not as calm as he seemed on the surface. Jean felt that she was about to go crazy. Her face was already red to the point of exploding. Damn it. Her hands were sore. Crazy. Crazy. In the end, the man held her hand tightly. His entire body was as stiff as stone, and he almost crushed her wrist. He buried his head in her neck in satisfaction and released a long, heavy breath. Jean finally turned her head away with a flushed face. The man's breath brushed against her neck, again and again. It was very hot and very warm. After a long time, he did not leave. He only held her in this position and gently kissed her ear. "It's been hard on you." Jean she really wanted to say, "Scram," but considering the man's current state, if she said anything else to provoke him, her hand would most likely be crippled here tonight. Jean body stiffened and did not speak. She allowed him to press against her like this. Finally, the man's breathing gradually calmed down. However, his slightly low and hoarse voice rang by her ear. It seemed to carry a hint of inquiry. "Is it very uncomfortable?" Jean rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. He actually asked her if she was uncomfortable? Nonsense. It wasn't like she didn't have physical needs. In the past 3 years, not only did he live like a monk, she clearly lived like a nun, okay? It was fine if she was kissed and hugged. Women were not sensitive in this aspect. But after being teased for so long, and just now, how could she not feel anything? She was stuck in this situation where she wanted to do something but could not. Instead, she had greatly satisfied him. She felt so uncomfortable that she was about to explode, okay? Jean Wan's blood pressure was about to soar. She clearly remembered that Imo Jingshan was, at least on the surface, a gentleman. When the two of them were still husband and wife, they could do anything. However, she remembered the time when he was schemed against by Imo Shaoza and was drugged and locked in the Wanli Xingchen Hotel. She was afraid that he would be too uncomfortable and suggested this idea, but because he was concerned about her feelings, he did not allow her to do anything. But today, Jean Wan's eyes were about to turn red. She did not know if she was torturing him or herself. Right now, he was clearly incomparably satisfied, but she did not know if she would be able to sleep tonight. Most importantly, she could not take a cold shower right now. This was really killing her. The man's kiss landed on her cheek again. He softly and warmly said, "You want it too?" N. Jean Wan continued to roll her eyes toward the ceiling. No. Then she heard the man's muffled laughter coming from his chest. It was low, husky, and seductive. Because he was pressed against her, the slight vibration of his chest almost stirred up her emotions. His kiss shifted to the corner of her lips. He softly said in a comforting tone, "At most, in 2 or 3 days, you can start eating. At that time, I'll wash up and lie on the bed for you to do whatever you want with me." As he spoke, his handsome face leaned toward her again. He kissed her harshly on the lips. Jean Wan swallowed back the angry curses she was about to say. He kissed her until she even forgot what she wanted to scold and only glared at him with a red face. Only then did he smile in satisfaction and kiss her cheek twice. Jean Wan was so angry that her nerves were about to break at any moment. Who wanted him to wash up and lie on the bed? Damn it, after she got through tonight, even if this man stripped naked on her bed in the future, all she wanted to do was tie him up tightly, and then find several women to do a striptease in front of him. She insisted on letting him taste the pain of being unable to be satisfied even though his body was on fire. Did he want her to take the initiative to bed him? Chapter 572. Imo Jingshan took a shower in her room. In the end, she threw him a bathrobe and told him to quickly scram back to his own room before he finally left. Jean Wan also went to take a shower. In the end, she laid on the bed. In her heart, the words, I can't sleep, echoed repeatedly. Bastard. Right now, it was already past 1 in the morning. She actually couldn't sleep. The next day, Jean Wan went downstairs for breakfast with dark circles under her eyes. It was past 7:00 when they had breakfast. Xiao Hu and Imo Jingshan were also there. Seeing Jean Wan walking back and forth around the round table with a breakfast plate in her hand, Xiao Hu untactfully got up to look for food and asked, "CEOG, didn't you sleep well last night?" Jean Wan didn't look at Xiao Hu's face. Jean Wan coldly glanced at him. "Do I look like I slept well?" Xiao Hu was startled. "Your complexion does seem like you didn't sleep well." Furthermore, her complexion was very bad. Her tone was also very harsh, as though she was very angry. However, Xiao Hu did not dare to say the latter half of his sentence. He only picked up 2 pieces of bread and dejectedly turned back to the table to sit down for breakfast. He then turned to look at CEO Mo, who was drinking coffee and could not help but ask, "CEO Mo, it seems like CEOG didn't sleep well last night. Today, she has a meeting at the auditorium. Do you need me to help her sign in? Is she resting in the hotel?" "No need." Before Imo Jingshan could speak, Jean Wan had already walked over with the tray. She expressionlessly spoke and then sat down. She did not even look at Mo Jingshan. Xiao Hu, who had offended this ancestor this time? Wasn't she still fine yesterday? She was still in the car, and even slept on CEO Mo's body. This night was clearly supposed to be peaceful. Why? Xiao Hu opened his mouth and watched in confusion as Jin Wan chewed hard on the toast during breakfast. He then glanced at the man by his side and softly said, CEO Mo, it's true that a woman's mood isn't very good during these days of the month. Her mood is also unpredictable, right? The man's expression didn't change. Maybe I drank too much champagne last night. My mind isn't clear yet. Jin Wan immediately glared at him angrily, only to see Mo Jingshan calmly picking up his coffee cup and continuing to drink. He did not seem to be aware that he had done something naughty in her room last night. As it turned out, he had satisfied himself by relieving himself once. He felt refreshed. I wonder who's the one who's not sober. Jin Wan no longer looked at him and rolled her eyes at the cup on the table. If you didn't sleep well, then stay in the room for a while longer. Why did you wake up so early? I'm here on a business trip. I'm here for work, not to accompany a big boss on a sightseeing tour. I don't have the habit of staying in bed if I don't sleep well. Jin Wan continued to argue. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. You received a painting worth 600 million yuan just by going on a business trip, and you can even receive all sorts of free and friendly services. Isn't this considered a sightseeing trip? Jin Wan, she couldn't help but slap the knife and fork in her hand on the table. However, in order to control her temper, she grabbed the toast with her hand, as though she wanted to squash it as Mo Jingshan. However, the moment she held it in her hand, she thought of last night, the feeling that kept burning her. Jin Wan's expression turned even uglier. How could she agree to do such a thing for him? She must have drunk a few glasses at the banquet last night, so she wasn't sober enough. She didn't expect that her alcohol tolerance, which she thought had improved a lot, was still so poor. She definitely wasn't sober last night. Mo Jingshan, even if you have selfish motives, you don't have to be so brazen. If there really isn't any serious work to do in Jing City, I can return to High City at any time. Xia Tian hasn't returned to the company yet, and the people in charge of the other companies can't be the pillars of support for the time being. If I'm not in the company, our company is basically in a free-range state right now. If there's nothing serious, I'll go back first. The man's hand paused as he placed the coffee cup down. He glanced sideways at her. In 2 days, there will be several business summits and exhibitions in Jing City, including some places arranged by the chairman of the Financial Association. You've only been in Jing City for 3 or 4 days, and you can't sit still anymore? She had already reached this stage in 3 or 4 days. If she really stayed here for half a month, wouldn't even her bones be left? Jin Wan quietly glanced at him. I'll apply to be excluded from the list. I'll give up on all the activities in Jing City. No. The man spoke without hesitation, not giving her any leeway at all. Jin Wan rolled her eyes at him and lowered her head to eat. Xiao Hu sat on the chair, drinking his milk as his heart trembled. It was really difficult for CEO Mo usually. He never brought a woman out, nor would he bring a woman to any social events. This time, he rarely brought a woman out on a business trip, but it turned out that CEO G was so stubborn. Cough, cough. Xiao Hu suddenly took the initiative to speak up with a smile. CEO G, you don't have to rush back to High City. The busiest time in Jing City is the first week of meetings. In 2 days, some activities arranged by the chairman of the Financial Association are more entertaining. For example, renting out a suburban villa for everyone to hold a joint queue, or renting out a resort for everyone to have fun, play cards, play ball, or go swimming. It's all very relaxing. In China, these were the ways of entertainment for these business tycoons. In fact, it was the same in London. There would often be some boss renting out a place for everyone to have fun together. Jin Wan's bowling and golf skills were all trained in the London business circle. She had long been tired of it and had no interest at all. Especially after what happened in the seaside resort in High City, she felt that the domestic business circle gatherings were meaningless. When she heard Xiao Hu mention swimming, her gaze immediately darkened. She resolutely spat out 5 words, "Even if I die, I won't go." Xiao Hu originally thought that she would relax after hearing these words. He did not expect to receive a cold rejection. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. Xiao Hu was startled and immediately lowered his head to continue eating his breakfast. He originally wanted to help Big Boss win a woman's heart, but it seemed like he had done more harm than good. Mo Jingshan withdrew his gaze and looked at Jin Wan. "It's fine if you don't want to go. I'm not interested in that kind of place where the nouveau riche gather. Why don't we find a hot spring hotel and change our way of vacation for a few days?" Ha, ha, ha ha. Hot spring hotel? Did he want to see her in a swimsuit swaying in front of him? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Jin Wan coldly laughed and placed down the cutlery in her hands. "I'm not going." After speaking, she stood up and continued to take food from the buffet area without looking back. Chapter 573. Xiao Hu finally found a place to display his abilities. His eyes immediately lit up as he said, "Deep. How about the Blue 7-Star Hotel? It's in Jing City's 2nd Ring Road. It's not far from here. If there's no traffic, we can reach it in 10 minutes." Deep Blue was a very famous scenic hotel in Beijing. Other than the hot spring pool, which was the cleanest in the country, and the 7-star service, there were also some special deep-sea themed rooms. Because there was no natural sea in Beijing, the rooms were surrounded by artificial ocean scenes. This way, it could satisfy the needs of people for a room with a sea view, and on the other hand, it was enough to ensure safety. Mo Jingshan tapped the table lightly with one finger. He turned to see that Jin Wan was still looking for food in the dining area. One moment, she was picking up some bacon, and the next moment, she was asking someone to cook a bowl of rice noodles with vegetable soup. She had no intention of returning to the table immediately. His gaze did not change as he calmly asked, "How many more days until the work in Jing City?" "There are still a few business partners that I have to meet personally, including the person in charge of the financial association who has connections with High City. There are also 2 that I have to attend a meeting with at the National Business Institute. CEOG also has a few business partners that I should meet. After all, it's rare for me to come to Jing City. Based on this, it should be over in about a week at the earliest." Xiao Hu calculated the time as he spoke. For the time being, it's most convenient to stay in Xingtang Hotel. After all, this is Shine's place. People in Jing City often hold meetings or discuss business here. It's convenient for us to do anything. As for the Blue 7-Star Hotel, after I'm done, I can stay there for 3 to 4 days. At this moment, Jin Wan had returned with the rice noodles with vegetable soup that she had asked the chef to prepare for her. When she placed the bowl on the table, she raised her eyes to see that Xiao Hu was seriously calculating the time. From time to time, he would take out his work schedule to look at. She turned to see that Mo Jingshan was still calmly drinking his coffee. She pretended that nothing had happened last night and ate quietly. After breakfast, they began their journey for the day. The first place they were going to today was the exhibition venue that they had made an appointment with their partners. It was the only place that was far away from Xingtang Hotel. According to Xiao Hu, it would take 2 hours to drive there. Because the distance was too far, and there would be several serious traffic jams in the middle of the road, it was possible to take more than 2 hours. Jin Wan only responded with a sound and did not say anything else. Since she did not sleep well last night, it was not bad to sleep in the car for 2 hours. In the end, Mo Jingshan clearly saw through her thoughts. She turned to meet the man's amused gaze and was instantly angered. Who was the reason she couldn't sleep well last night? In the car, Jin Wan sat in the car and leaned against the door. Seeing her blatantly keeping a distance from him, Mo Jingshan couldn't help narrowing his eyes. There's only so much space in the car. Where can you hide? Do you need me to send you another car? Jin Wan originally thought that since they were coming to Jing City, there would definitely be a car arranged for them to pick them up and send them off. However, she did not expect that Imo Jingshan would choose to keep things simple. He only had Xiao who drive them and did not call anyone else over. As a result, she could only sit in the same car with him every day. It would be best if you could really send me another car. Jin Wan did not refuse. The man's handsome figure was elegant and cold. He coldly glanced at her. In your dreams. Jin Wan, when you're not feeling well, you enjoy my care, eat the porridge I personally cooked for you, and sit in my car. You still want to keep your distance from me, yet you want to send another car to follow behind you. Are you here on a business trip or to anger me? Jin Wan chuckled and coldly said with displeasure, you used the excuse of taking care of me to run into my room in the middle of the night. Why didn't you tell me what you did when you were taking care of me? Xiao Hu who was driving, heavens, hurry up and block his ears. This kind of flirting was very torturous, all right? The man watched her with a hint of a smile. I see that you don't reject my appearance every night. When have I not taken good care of you? Ha, he. It was very appropriate. Appropriate to the point that she did not sleep much last night. Jin Wan leaned against the car door, trying to keep as far away from him as possible. The man glanced at her. Come here. Don't sit by the car door. Don't you find it hard to lean against? I'm fine sitting here. Jin Wan stubbornly turned her head away from the window. However, the place they were going to today was really very far. Jin Wan remained leaning against the car door for nearly half an hour. In the end, she really felt that the door was hard and uncomfortable, and her back was aching from sitting in such a position. She even said that she would sleep in the car for 2 hours. What the hell would she sleep for? She couldn't sleep in this position at all. But if she continued to sit there, it would be too embarrassing. Just as she calmly raised her hand to rub her waist that was hurting from being pressed against the car door, the man's long arm reached over. He did not allow her to refuse or struggle and pulled her back. At the same time, he held her shoulders and did not allow her to move. Jin Wan passively leaned into his embrace. Jin Wan, Mo Jingshan pressed her into his embrace and did not release her. Even when you're so uncomfortable, you still have to hold back your temper. You'd rather keep your distance from me even if your back hurts? Do you want to sleep in my arms for a while, or do you want to continue leaning against the car door and staring out the window to exhaust the little energy you have left? Choose. Jin Wan was forcefully pressed into his embrace. She struggled but could not get up. She turned to see that Xiao Hu did not turn back or look at the rearview mirror, as though nothing could enter his ears. She then raised her eyes to roll them at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan, where's your face? If I want to sleep, what position can't I sleep in? Why must I lean against your arms to sleep? Heh. Looking at his aloof and dignified manner, he did not seem to mind her sarcasm and retort at all. It was clear that he was greatly satisfied last night and was in a very good mood today. However, her mood was extremely bad. Jin Wan suspected that his next sentence would be to boast about how warm and comfortable his embrace was. Thankfully, he did not. As he held her, he gently patted her back that was so angry that her hair was about to stand on end. Today will be a busy day. Are you sure you don't want to sleep for a while? I'll lean against the back and sleep by myself. Jin Wan's expression was stiff. She raised her hand to push the man's arm away from her shoulder. Chapter 574. Jin Wan used her hand to push away his hand on her waist. She even used her nails to dig at him. Not only did Mo Jingshan not let go, but he held her even tighter. The man's indifferent voice came from above her head. Jin Wan, I've already gone easy on you. Why are you still so stubborn? Jin Wan immediately raised her eyes to glare at him. Afraid that Xiao Hu would hear her, she used a voice that only he could hear to say, "Weren't you already satisfied last night? Can't you let me sit quietly for a while? Why are you still hugging me? Let go." The man's expression was heavy. His voice was light and carried a hint of a chuckle. "Who told you that I was satisfied just last night?" Jean Wan's originally relaxed heart instantly tensed up again. She even suspected that this man was not the Mo Jingshan she used to know. Her teeth began to itch. She gritted them and said, "Then what else do you want? Wasn't it enough for you to bully me last night? Could it be that you still want to?" He abruptly sneered. His meaning was unclear, but it was as though he was pointing at something. When a man bullies a woman, there's never a need to use the kind of forceful method that you used last night to comfort me. You're just in a special period. I can't touch you. Be good and sleep in my arms. Don't stir up any more trouble, En. Jean Wan still wanted to say something, but the man's handsome face suddenly enlarged in her vision. Realizing that he was going to kiss her in the car, her eyes almost popped out. She abruptly leaned her head back and secretly glanced at Xiao Hu, who was driving. She saw that Xiao Hu was still sitting there without turning back. He did not even glance at the rearview mirror. He was really self-aware. She did not even want to ask for help. Mo Jingshan understood Jean Wan's bottom line. He could tease her as much as he wanted in private, but they were in the car, and there were outsiders around. If he went too far, her temper would most likely be bad for several days. He did not kiss her in the end. He only patted her waist comfortingly. "Are you sure you don't want to sleep for a while?" Jean Wan finally chose to push him in his arms again. When the man no longer forced her and let go of her waist, she stepped back, leaned against the back of the leather chair in the back, closed her eyes, and planned to sleep like this. Then, she really fell asleep just like that. Perhaps it was because he had used up some energy when he was struggling, or perhaps the sleepiness from last night had finally hit him. This time, she finally fell asleep so quickly that she didn't need Mo Jingshan to hold her again. Her head tilted to the side and rested on the man's shoulder. 2 hours later, Xiao Hu stopped the car. Although Jean Wan had fallen asleep, she opened her eyes when the car suddenly stopped. Her head was no longer resting on Mo Jingshan's shoulder because she had changed her position when she slept. She narrowed her eyes and looked out of the window. It was past 8 o'clock, and it was almost 11 o'clock now. The sun was blazing at this time. She narrowed her eyes and looked out of the car window. Just as she was about to ask if they had arrived, she met the man's warm eyes. He didn't rush her to wake up and get out of the car. Instead, he waited patiently for her to wake up naturally. Fortunately, she was sensitive and woke up as soon as the car stopped. Otherwise, she didn't know how long she would have slept in the car. "Have we arrived?" She avoided the man's gaze and asked. "Yes, we've arrived." "CEOG, you've slept for more than an hour. It seems that you haven't had much rest in the hotel these days. Recently, you've been sleeping in the car," Xiao Hu said very untimely. After saying that, he realized what he had just said. Looking at Jean Wan's awkward expression and Mo Jingshan's cold glance through the rearview mirror, Xiao Hu's scalp went numb in an instant. Dead. He didn't mean to tease her. He just instinctively felt that CEOG really didn't sleep well last night. Should he explain it to her? But CEO Mo's eyes were so fierce. He'd better not speak. Xiao Hu scrambled out of the car. Jean Wan raised her hand and tidied her hair, which was a little messy because she had fallen asleep. Her shoulder-length hair was tied into a clean ponytail behind her head, mainly for business trips. She didn't tidy her hair every day as delicately as she usually did at home. "What time will it be?" she asked as she tidied up her hair. 11 o'clock. There's still 15 minutes to go. Don't worry. Mo Jingshan sat quietly by her side, watching the little woman raise her hand to take down her hairband, bite it by her lips, and then quickly tie up her hair with both hands. Hearing the time, Jean Wan was no longer in a hurry. She tidied up her hair, opened her bag, took out a lipstick that was not too dark but suitable for light makeup, and smeared it on her lips. When she rummaged in her bag for something to touch up, the man saw her cell phone in her bag. Your cell phone kept ringing when you fell asleep. Is there any news? Is there? Jean Wan picked up her cell phone, unlocked it, and glanced at it. There were no messages, only a few messages from Xia Tian and recent photos of the baby in WeChat. Since Xia Tian gave birth to the baby, she had become a craze for posting pictures of the baby. Every day, not only did she post pictures of the baby to her WeChat moments, but she also sent a few more to Jean Wan. There were also 2 messages from her secretary, saying something about the company. Jean Wan glanced at them. Xia Tian sent me a WeChat message. The man stared at her with deep eyes. WeChat? Jean Wan, who was about to put her cell phone back into her bag, paused, and suddenly turned to look at the man. Don't you know what happened in the following years? You must know what's popular in China in the following years. Is WeChat very strange? The man was expressionless. I was in the United States and didn't have much contact with domestic things. Jean Wan, yes, WeChat had become particularly popular in China in recent years, and Weibo and WeChat had almost replaced QQ and other social media software in previous years. But in foreign countries, there were not many people who used it, and it was only popular in some Chinese circles and in China. No matter what stage he was in, he could only send her some messages, but only some serious things. He didn't even send her a good morning or a good night, and he was even more reticent to others. Therefore, it was normal that he had never used WeChat. After all, even if his staff had helped him register a WeChat account, with his noble, cold, and uncommunicative style, it was likely that he had long abandoned it and never touched it. Chapter 575. 15 minutes later, Jean Wan looked at the new WeChat friend list. No matter how she thought about it, she felt that she had been tricked by Mo Jingshan. She had already registered a WeChat friend for him, but why did he add him as a friend? Just now, when she asked him to choose a random profile picture, she searched through his phone's photo album for a long time, only to find some photos of the company's meeting documents. Not to mention selfies, there wasn't even a landscape picture. He couldn't use a photo of a meeting document as his profile picture, could he? Jean Wan said the scenery outside the car window was very good, so she asked him to take a photo outside the car window and use it as his profile picture. The man agreed, picked up his phone, and took a photo outside the car window, but it wasn't his side of the car window, but hers. So when the man changed his profile picture, Jean Wan clicked on the friend list and was instantly speechless. How could he take a photo of the scenery? He took a photo of her and the scenery outside the car window together. The name on the WeChat account he had just registered was still blank, and the man was not in a hurry to change his name. He just changed his profile picture and put the phone away. Jean Wan stared at the WeChat friend who had a blank name but used her photo as his profile picture and was so angry that her face turned black. It's 11:00. Get out. The man got out of the car as if nothing had happened. Jean Wan, today, they came to a place far from the center of Beijing to meet a few business partners. Mo Jingshan rarely visited in person, so these business partners specially chose a place to welcome him. Everyone gathered together to wait for Mo Jingshan's arrival. Jean Wan also had a few acquaintances here today, but they were not as close as Mo Jingshan to them, so she simply greeted them, exchanged business cards, and chatted for a while before finding a place to sit down. Xiao, who didn't follow Mo Jingshan to greet those partners but was told by Mo Jingshan to stay by Jean Wan's side and help her whenever she needed anything. It was rare for Xiao Hu to fulfill his duty as a bodyguard. Jean Wan sat there, and he could do anything he wanted. Anyway, this ancestor in front of CEO Mo had such a high status, so of course he had to serve her as if she were the Empress Dowager. Jean Wan was about to ask Xiao Hu to sit down and rest for a while, but before she could speak, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a figure from the corner of her eye. Her hand that was about to touch the glass paused and turned to look in that direction. After Mo Jingshan had decided on his itinerary in Jing City, Rong Yen had inquired about his itinerary these days and knew where he would go. Last night, she didn't get a chance to talk to Mo Jingshan at the banquet and the charity auction. Although she could see that Mo Jingshan really had no feelings for her and seemed to really love that Jin Wan, she couldn't accept it and sneaked out of home early. After all, she was the second daughter of a wealthy family in Jing City. No one dared to stop her if she wanted to come here. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had just talked with someone, Rong Yen came out of the lounge behind and walked up to him. Mr. Mo Jingshan was not surprised to see her here again. He just looked at her indifferently. He heard her but didn't respond. Did you come alone today? Rong Yen had been standing behind him and couldn't see what was going on in front of the door. It took her a long time to notice Mo Jingshan in the crowd, only to see that he didn't bring the woman named Jin Wan with him today. But she didn't know what he was thinking, so she didn't dare to ask why Jin Wan didn't come with him today. Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze landed on her. His pitch-black eyes were cold and emotionless. Second Miss Rong indeed has the capital to do as she pleases in Jing City. However, today's venue is not a banquet hall. Most of the people here are capitalistic businessmen, and the topics discussed here are all business matters. I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. Rong Yen smiled bitterly. You must know why I'm here. I've been strictly controlled by my family since I was a child. It's rare for me to come back to China after graduation and rebel, but I didn't expect that I'd come to nothing. Mr. Mo, I don't mean anything else. I just want to ask, what's so bad about me that you don't even bother to look at me? Mo Jingshan didn't speak. This man had a kind of indifference that made people tremble in fear. Even though she was the famous second daughter of the Rong family in the capital circle, she could only choose to be silent in front of him. She didn't have the slightest temper of a rich young lady. His indifference seemed to be able to spread everywhere, making her not even the slightest impulse to hug him or the courage to be shameless. Because she knew that the more she pestered him, the less he liked her. But when he glanced at her so coldly, she couldn't help but want to step back, but she held back. Am I not beautiful enough? My family background is not good enough? My education is not high enough? Or do you hate me because I'm too arrogant and domineering? I think I'm very gentle, at least in front of Alien, and I'm rarely hated, but from the beginning to the present, you've never looked at me. I know Mr. Mo, you've seen a lot of good women, but in this country, I'm confident that only the Rong family can match your family background. Even if you don't care about these things, you didn't have any other women around you in the past few years. Why can't you treat me? Mo Jingshan's eyes and voice were indifferent. Miss Rong, you've investigated me for so long. Don't you know that I've been married? Rong Yan's expression froze. She really didn't find out his past. Besides, Mo Jingshan's past was not something that anyone could easily find out. She had asked someone to help her investigate for so long, but they could only find out some superficial things. There were many things she wanted to know about his past, but she could not find out anything about it. You are married? Rong Yen couldn't believe it. Mo Jingshan's thin lips turned up slightly. He chuckled and glanced at the seat where Jin Wan was sitting. Rong Yen followed his gaze and looked in that direction. The moment she saw Jin Wan again, she suddenly understood everything. Even though there were still many things she didn't know, it seemed like she wasn't qualified to know. She pursed her lips, feeling very uncomfortable in her heart. Her face was also a little embarrassed, but when the words came to her mouth, she could only say, sorry. I was rude. With that, she turned and left, not staying any longer, nor did she have the face to stay any longer. When Rong Yen left, Mo Jingshan returned to Jin Wan's side and sat down. Suddenly, he heard the little woman playing with the glass of water and asking, why don't you continue chatting with your Rong Yen? Why are you sitting here? Chapter 576. Jean Wan said indifferently, I don't care who she is. You don't need to explain to me. The man glanced sideways at her. You're so jealous. Don't try to cover it up. Jean Wan glanced at him. Why do I look like I'm jealous? You look like you are. She looked expressionlessly at the crowd. Your Rong Yen is still there. Why did you ignore her after just a few words? On this occasion, she obviously came especially for you. After a pause, she added, and she's still looking at you. The man looked at her again, then turned his head to look at Rong Yen, who was still looking at him in the crowd, and said casually, she's just observing my relationship with you. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. What did you say to her? I said I'm married. Jean Wan, she put the glass in her hand on the table and said coldly, you've already divorced. Why are you still talking about marriage? Are you using me as a shield? What are you thinking? Mo Jingshan said lightly, not to mention that you're married, do you want her to continue to pester you with endless hope, or do you want the Rong family to target you? Jean Wan sneered. Then should I thank you for helping me avoid so many troubles in this way? The Rong family is not so unreasonable. Although Rongqing did go a bit too far, I think the Rong family cares more about their reputation and won't resort to such despicable means. At this moment, other partners took the initiative to come over and talk to Mo Jingshan, as if they couldn't wait to say something to Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's face didn't change at all. He just grunted, casually greeted them, and still sat opposite Jean Wan, not avoiding her at all. At this time, some partners of MN Group happened to be nearby, so Jean Wan got up to talk to them and didn't continue to sit here. The people around Mo Jingshan had left, but Jean Wan still hadn't come back. Mo Jingshan sat quietly in his seat and saw Jean Wan fluttering among the partners like a butterfly. Her every frown and smile was so charming. From time to time, she took a glass of red wine and clinked glasses with those people. From time to time, she would take a document handed over by a partner and read it, and then she would continue to talk to them with a smile. The business world was comparable to a social arena. Today, Jean Wan could still see some traces of her past coquettishness in private, but when she was at work or socializing, she was like a fully armed female warrior, and a smiling female warrior at that. Jean Wan hadn't come back yet, and Mo Jingshan was not in a hurry to call her. Looking at her figure over there, he remembered something and took out his cell phone to take a look. He opened the WeChat account that Jean Wan had just set up for him, looked at his profile picture, smiled, and clicked on Jean Wan's WeChat moments. Jean Wan had been using WeChat for almost a year, but she had only posted a few posts on WeChat moments. The first one was a picture of the night sky in London taken by her cell phone. There was only one picture of the night sky, and nothing was written on it. The second one was 2 months later. It was a picture of the messy desk full of documents in her office in London, accompanied by a hard-working emoji and 3 words, the third year. The third one was a picture of her hands and the hands of 2 other girls. Each hand stretched out in a V shape to form a 5-pointed star. Jean Wan wrote on the photo, "It's rare for me to come out for an outing and breathe the fresh air. Why are Feng Ling's and Xiao Ba's hands whiter than mine? I'm not convinced. I'm calling Xia Tian, who is suntanned in High City. Come quickly." Aggrieved. After that, there were a few retweets of London financial reports and a chicken soup about workplace beliefs and so on. Then, she didn't post any more posts on WeChat moments before returning to China. After returning to China, her WeChat moments were all blank except for a bird's eye view taken from the top floor of the Shengtang Hotel in Beijing 2 days ago, accompanied by a line of text, "This business trip is really painful." Before that, during the period after returning to China, she didn't post a word or a photo. Whether it was the first time she met him after returning to China, or where they met again, or the gradual change in their relationship, she didn't say a word. It seemed that her heart was not disturbed at all. The man couldn't help frowning. Her WeChat moments were all about work, career, or friendship. He should be glad that she didn't mention any man, but at the same time, she didn't mention himself, not even a little emotional. Mo Jingshan looked at her WeChat moments again and made sure that he didn't miss a single one. There was indeed no trace of him. The man put down his cell phone and looked expressionlessly at Jin Wan, who had come back. Jin Wan had just said too much and was a little thirsty. Xiao Hu quickly put a glass of juice on the table in front of Jin Wan. Jin Wan came over and took a sip. Then she took the cooperation plan she had just received from a partner and sat on the table to read it. After reading for a while, she suddenly felt the air around her was a little depressed. She raised her hand and took another sip of juice. When she looked up, she saw that Mo Jingshan was looking at her deeply. She said, "Why are you looking at me? Didn't you come to work today? CEO Mo seems to be very free. CEO G, even you didn't pay much attention to our CEO Mo when he was busy. Just now, there were a lot of people pestering him. It's rare for him to come here and sit quietly for a while. In this kind of formal social event, everyone acts according to the mood. It's obvious that CEO Mo is resting here, so not many people dare to come over and talk," Xiao Hu chimed in. "Oh, it was because Boss Missouri didn't need to put on airs here. Just sitting here, people consciously gave him time to rest, and no one dared to come over." Sure enough, different people were different. She still had to get up to chat and laugh with those partners or some bosses who were developing cooperative relationships, and then she had to come over with the cooperation plan. He just needed to sit here quietly and let others worship and respect him. She came to work to discuss this kind of thing, and he came to work to just wait for the person to arrive. But why did he keep staring at her? They had been together from morning to night these days. Hadn't he got tired of looking at her? Jin Wan ignored him, lowered her head to continue to read the documents at hand, and took out a pen from her bag to carefully mark the problems in the cooperation plan in red circles. Seeing Jin Wan working so seriously, Mo Jingshan didn't speak but just looked at the woman who was immersed in her work and didn't take him seriously at all. Chapter 577. For the next 2 to 3 days, they entered a busy work phase. Jin Wan's period of discomfort had finally passed. She could now go to work and socialize with all her might. She attended all sorts of meetings, exhibitions, and other matters. On this trip to Jing City, the only major mistake she made was to believe Mo Jingshan's words. He said that there was no need to bring an assistant or secretary. As a result, she had to do everything personally. Of course, Mo Jingshan did not call Shenmu over. Instead, he brought Xiao Hu over. Clearly, most of the time, Xiao Hu was treated as their chauffeur or housekeeper. All sorts of miscellaneous tasks were handled by Xiao Hu. As for the other matters, Mo Jingshan rarely did them personally. For the past 2 days, she had been so busy that she did not have any free time. Every day, she would only return to the hotel after 10:00 at night. She would drag her tired body and take a shower before falling into a deep sleep. In the past few years, the property market in the country had been on the rise. This time, there was a construction exhibition in Jing City that was jointly organized by the nation's property companies. All the major property companies in the country had been invited to participate. Although MN Group was diversified, it was still founded on property. Thus, it was also one of the invited names. Mo Jingshan was also invited, but at the same time, he had a more important meeting to attend. Thus, Mo Jingshan left Xiao Hu by Jin Wan's side and had Xiao Hu accompany her to attend the construction exhibition. After arriving at the exhibition hall, Xiao Hu eagerly helped Jin Wan with various matters. He went in first to make arrangements and then came out. "CEO G, I found a seat for you. You can sit down for the entire exhibition. You can also sit with the people in charge of BGY Group. I heard that BGY Group has been in contact with your company for the past few years. This way, it'll be more convenient for you to talk while looking at the architectural models. Are BGY's people here as well?" That's right. For an exhibition like this to be held in Jing City, a large property company like BGY will definitely have a spot. Jean Wan nodded and walked in. Today's exhibition was mostly about the physical models of various landmarks in the country, as well as some buildings that sold particularly well and had referential prices. In the exhibition hall, there was a huge map with the names of each city and model marked. Among them, there were 4 models in High City. Shine Group currently did not specialize in the real estate industry. Although Mo Jingshan was also invited, Shine Group's buildings were not among the models. Instead, there were 2 from BGY Group and 2 from High City's newest real estate companies. MN Group's buildings were also not among them. This thing was actually a representation, nothing more than an exhibition and introduction. After Jean Wan went in, she greeted several familiar people from High City. Xiao Hu pointed her to the seats that had been arranged. She nodded and walked over there. When she first arrived, she did not pay much attention to the people nearby. All of a sudden, she heard a familiar male voice. Jean Wan? She couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She turned around abruptly and saw Mr. Vince, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, walking to the seat next to her with Secretary Yang, who was always with him. Jean Wan looked at Mr. Vince and then at his seat, which was next to hers. Jean Wan, this was the seat arranged by Xiao Hu? He was innocent, wasn't he? If Mo Jingshan were to find out, she wasn't sure if Xiao Hu would still be able to keep his job. Why are you in Jing City? Before Jean Wan could speak, Mr. Vince had seen the nameplate of the seat next to his and turned to look at her, asking at the same time. I'm here on a business trip. I've been in Jing City for several days. Haven't you been back to High City recently? Jean Wan sat down first. Seeing that she had sat down, Mr. Vince gave a faint smile, motioned for Secretary Yang to go to his seat, and then sat in the seat closest to Jean Wan. I haven't been back to High City for some time. I received an exhibition notice in Jing City, so I flew over early this morning. Mr. Vince said as he opened the bottle of mineral water on the table for her and handed it to her. I haven't seen you for some time. How have you been? If someone else had asked this question, it would have been a polite greeting, but coming from Mr. Vince's mouth, Jean Wan knew that he really wanted to ask how she was doing recently. She took the water and smiled. I'm fine. I've been busy these days, so I fell asleep as soon as I went back to the hotel. I slept well at night and was in good spirits during the day. The new projects and collaborations I've been talking about have all gone well. Hearing her words, Mr. Vince smiled. Why do you look so pale? Jean Wan noticed that Mr. Vince's face was thinner and paler than before. A few days ago, I had a gathering with some old classmates who came back from abroad. I haven't had a gathering for many years. It's rare for us to get together, so I drank too much and hurt my stomach. It's all right. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Mr. Vince smiled mildly because of her relationship with him. After all, I'm no longer a young man in my teens or 20s. I'm in my 30s. I should control my drinking. Otherwise, it's easy for me to drink too much and hurt my body. Hearing that he hurt his stomach because of drinking, Jean Wan couldn't help but be slightly surprised. I always thought you could hold your liquor well. Yes, I could. Mr. Vince smiled. But no matter how good your drinking capacity is, you can't try mixing red, white, and beer all night without stopping. Jean Wan nodded. I don't dare to try that. You know, no matter how good my drinking capacity was when I was in London, I can't even hold 2 bottles of wine. If I mix white and red, I'll probably collapse after a few glasses. Mr. Vince chuckled. You better forget it. There's no need for a girl to drink so much. Usually, you secretly pour away a lot at the table. Don't think I didn't see it. There were several times when Jean Wan met Mr. Vince at the table, but she didn't expect him to see all of her little actions. She couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like I need to practice my technique of secretly pouring wine. You saw it, so did everyone else. If everyone knows it, and I still pretend to drink to my heart's content, how awkward would that be? As she spoke, Xiao Hu approached from behind. The seat Xiao Hu had arranged for him was right behind Jin Wan. He noticed that Jin Wan and this BGY representative were chatting happily and seemed to be very familiar with each other. When they were chatting, their bodies were leaning closer to each other, as though they were whispering with their heads lowered. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.